Chapter 985. This is a tribulation. It's really terrifyingly powerful. Luo Fan's sigh reverberated in the universe. The Luo Fan that appeared in the universe just now could not be Luo Fan's real body. It was just a projection. However, this projection could already represent Luo Fan to a certain extent. Obviously, at the moment when Dai Changhe's inner universe was connected with the Saint region outside, the exotic beast had destroyed Luo Fan's projection, which had naturally triggered the rules that had just been established in this world. Thus, it triggered the shocking calamity. When the soul of the long-winged white tiger dissipated, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the shackles of the realm he had encountered suddenly weakened by a large margin. The river of time surged ceaselessly, and the bright red light on it became more dazzling. The way it flowed became more mysterious, and the changes of the waves on the river became more subtle. It's only equivalent to 30 great accomplishments sage to be. Without this sudden tribulation, the gains do not make up for the losses. Luo Fan weighed the benefits he had gained and could not help but sigh. Before dealing with the long-winged white tiger at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be level, he still needed to kill 8,934 living beings at the great accomplishment level of the sage-to-be level to break through the shackles of the realm. However, after killing the long-winged white tiger, he still needed to kill 8,904 living beings at the great accomplishment level of the sage-to-be level to complete the killing process. In this way, the long-winged white tiger at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be level was only equivalent to 30 great accomplishments sage to be. Look, however, these 30 great accomplishments sage to be would require him to spend tens of thousands of times more time and energy to deal with them than a normal great accomplishment sage to be. No matter how he looked at it, the losses did not make up for the gains. With a slight thought, a long-winged white tiger suddenly appeared in the universe inside the river of time. This long-winged white tiger was the exotic beast at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be level that he had killed previously. However, at this moment, the long-winged white tiger was no longer as angry and tyrannical as before. Instead, it was very tame, looking like a domestic pet. After the long-winged white tiger was killed by the tribulations, just like the other beasts that Luo Fan had killed in the inner universe of the Time River, he could also condense them again, turn into his power, help him to continue his slaughter. Fortunately, it would be troublesome if I couldn't condense it with the help of the tribulations. Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief. Originally, he was still a little worried that he wouldn't be able to kill the exotic beast with his own strength. Instead, it was the bad consequences of using the tribulations of the sanctuary to complete this process. As a result, he couldn't make use of them like he did with the other creatures he had killed with his own hands. Now that the situation was so perfect, he was naturally happy. It was a perfect situation. Naturally, it made Luo Fan bolder to carry out the plan he had just come up with. The rules have just appeared. Those advanced sage-to-be exotic beasts that don't have much spiritual intelligence won't be able to react so quickly and won't run away so easily. As for those pinnacle sage-to-be exotic beasts, I'm not sure. Therefore, what I need to do now is to find those pinnacle sage-to-be exotic beasts. As Luo Fan thought to himself, his puppet took him across the void and headed towards the area he had gone around previously. Before the emergence of the tribulations, it was naturally not cost-effective to fight against the pinnacle sage-to-be exotic beasts. The gains didn't make up for the losses. However, with the tribulations, the result was naturally different. Those pinnacle sage-to-be exotic beasts became his best choice, which could greatly shorten the process of killing. In a short while, Luo Fan had already arrived at the place where he had previously bypassed. There was a peak sage-to-be level exotic beast entrenched there. Its incomparably powerful aura filled the world and the void, turning the heaven and earth within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles into its personal territory. Any unpermitted creatures would be repelled and wouldn't dare to approach it. Luo Fan's puppet took Luo Fan and crashed directly into it. In an instant, he felt an indescribable pressure from the bottom of his heart. This exotic beast was a snake-shaped exotic beast. It was hundreds of thousands of feet long. Even its head looked like a huge mountain. It entrenched itself in the center of the territory without any cover or protection, just like an ordinary giant creature entrenched there. This was natural. As a pinnacle sage-to-be exotic beast, it obviously had the right to do so. Not to mention the void within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. Even in the entire sanctuary, except for the sages, few people would be willing to provoke it for no reason. Why would it need to defend itself? Why would it need to hide itself? This was obviously convenient for Luo Fan. Luo Fan didn't hesitate at all. After entering this area, he immediately controlled his river of time to make a sudden turn and detour. Then he came to the side of the huge, snake-shaped exotic beast and slammed into it, intending to suck it into the internal universe of the river of time and kill it. Since the snake-shaped exotic beast dared to be so careless in the open, it naturally wouldn't be sucked away by the river of time so easily. It snorted coldly, opened its eyes, and shook its body. A mysterious wave spread out from its body and turned into a huge snake-shaped shadow. It rushed up, broke away from its body, and crashed into the river of time. Then, it merged with the river of time, leaving its body and even rushing towards Luo Fan. The river of time was mysterious and could collect everything. It could even kill peak sage-to-be exotic beasts within it. But in the end, it was only condensed from Luo Fan's power. No matter how profound it was impossible for it to escape so easily when it was wrapped in that terrifying power. Therefore, for a moment, Luo Fan was unable to control the river of time. He allowed the river of time to be wrapped up by the snake-shaped ripple phantom and rush back at an unimaginable speed, directly colliding with him. It looked like it was about to collide with him. Seeing this, Luo Fan didn't panic in the slightest. Instead, he chuckled and raised his hand. A projection of himself directly appeared in front of a long snake phantom. He opened his arms, as if to embrace the long snake phantom. He was defenseless and without any resistance. He waited for the long snake phantom to directly hit his body. In an instant, a blood-curdling scream rang out. It was a scream, but it didn't come from Luo Fan's projection. And it didn't come from Luo Fan's projection either. Instead, it came from the huge snake below. The snake-shaped exotic beast was terrified. It tried its best to control the snake-shaped shadow and retract it. It no longer charged towards Luo Fan, and around its body. It was everywhere in the sanctuary. A faintly discernible, indestructible, and eternal aura was gathering towards it. The aura surpassed its own aura at an extremely fast speed, causing the aura that originally enveloped an area of hundreds of thousands of kilometers to shrink back into the snake's body in an instant, as if it had never existed. The aura that was suppressing it was still growing. This pressure made the long snake's head, which was originally held high, lower gradually. Its entire body began to shrink uncontrollably. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk from its original length of 100,000 meters to only a few meters. Under such circumstances, how could the snake-shaped waves of its body continue to control Luo Fan's river of time? It had long since disappeared without a trace. I can't let you die like this. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The river of time suddenly surged and drilled through, as if transcending time and space. Almost as soon as it was about to drill through, it appeared above the snake-shaped exotic beast's head and directly enveloped it. The snake-shaped exotic beast was currently doing its best to resist the omnipresent aura's pressure. How could it have the energy to stop Luo Fan? Naturally, it was enveloped into the universe inside the river of time without any reservations. This time, Luo Fan didn't release the connection between the universe and the outside world. So, although a portion of his aura was enveloped into the universe along with the long snake, it was still constantly suppressing the snake-shaped exotic beast, preventing it from fully exerting its strength. However, the other more lethal auras that were continuously gathering didn't continue to affect the snake-shaped exotic beast, allowing it to temporarily escape. Unable to find the snake-shaped exotic beast, the aura slowly dissipated. Soon, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Just as I expected, Luo Fan smiled. His mind had already entered the universe inside the river of time and began to control the countless living beings that could be condensed and simulated to attack the snake-shaped exotic beast. This attack only lasted for a month. After a month, Luo Fan felt his body tremble. The shackles of his cultivation realm had weakened a little, and the river of time was even more dazzling and mysterious. The number of great accomplishment quasi-saint realm living beings that he needed to kill to break through the shackles of his cultivation realm had increased to 8,894. The reason why it was so fast this time was not complicated. The snake-shaped exotic beast was suppressed by the aura that entered the universe inside the river of time and could not exert its full strength. Moreover, a pinnacle quasi-saint realm long-winged white tiger had appeared in the universe inside the river of time. Due to this, it was naturally much easier than the previous time. The snake-shaped exotic beast had taken a month to complete the strangulation task because it was too powerful. 8,894 doesn't seem to be a big number. Luo Fan could not help thinking as he sensed the change in the shackles of his cultivation realm. Shaking his head, his figure flashed as he followed the puppet he had refined and continued to head towards the next area that he had previously bypassed. There, he used the same method. First, he sent a projection to the exotic beast at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm to kill. When the exotic beast was about to die and could not resist, he used the river of time to draw it into his internal universe. Then he used the power of the two exotic beasts at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm, more than 1,000 exotic beasts at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm, and countless exotic beasts at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm to kill it. This time, it only took him half a month to complete the strangulation task and reduce the number of great accomplishment quasi-saint realm living beings he needed to kill to 8,864. Then, he rushed to the next area. This time, the pinnacle quasi-saint realm living being he encountered was even more cautious. It had already decided to leave this place. Unfortunately, there were too many things that needed to be brought, so when Luo Fan rushed over, he still hadn't prepared everything and was blocked by Luo Fan in the lair. This was because this exotic beast was unimaginably cautious. Therefore, no matter what Luo Fan did, he could not anger it. It only dodged and did not attack to kill the projection that Luo Fan sent to it. Fortunately, it was not resolute enough in its dodging because it was afraid of hurting the innocent. In the end, Luo Fan seized the opportunity to draw it into the universe inside the river of time. Another 10 days passed. The number to kill had shrunk to 8,834, and so on and so forth. Luo Fan spent 3 years walking through the areas that he had bypassed before. With the help of the tribulations, he drew the pinnacle quasi-saint realm exotic beasts into his river of time. Then, he used the accumulated power to strangulate them. In the end, he obtained unimaginable benefits. After he had walked through the area with a circumference of tens of thousands of kilometers, when he killed all the pinnacle quasi-saint realm exotic beasts, the number to kill had been reduced to 7,874. Counting. In this area, he had killed as many as 34 pinnacle quasi-saint realm exotic beasts. And all of this was brought about by his status as a guest elder of the Hidden Armor sect. From the looks of it, the benefits of this status were equivalent to more than 1,000 large success quasi-saint level strange beasts. If he counted the large success quasi-saint level strange beasts that he had slain without relying on tribulations, but with his own strength, after all, his status as a guest elder of the Hidden Armor sect allowed him to enter the sanctuary, which could barely be counted as a benefit of his status. Then this number would be increased by more than 1,000. However, there were so many pinnacle quasi-saint realm exotic beasts in this area that was given to the Hidden Armor sect. One could imagine how terrifying the danger of the sanctuary was. In these years, Luo Fan had also passed through the encampment of the Hidden Armor sect to enter the sanctuary. After all, the Hidden Armor sect was not strong enough. Even with the protection of the sanctuary, they did not dare to wander around the sanctuary casually. In these years, they had only chosen a relatively dangerous location to set up encampment and let many of their disciples out. He knew very little about the Saint region. Luo Fan did not have much affection for the Hidden Armor sect. Naturally, he could not be bothered to care about them. He did not even go down to greet them. At this time, Luo Fan was already in the other direction from where he had started. He was close to the end of the territory of the Hidden Armor sect. Outside of this territory was still a wilderness. However, the number of living beings here was many times more than in the territory of the Hidden Armor sect. Many of them had clearly moved over in the past few years. Compared to living in the territory of the Hidden Armor sect, fearing that someone they couldn't resist would come knocking on their door, living in a place not far away from the Hidden Armor sect, even if the competition was fierce, was a better choice. As a result, the creatures living near this territory would instinctively move to a place outside of it. Ahead is no longer the territory of the Hidden Armor sect. I have to be careful. It's not good to use the previous method again. Luo Fan looked around and could not help but sigh. Naturally, he was not afraid of anything outside his territory. However, the feeling of being able to beat up others without being able to retaliate was indeed quite wonderful. Even he could not help but feel nostalgic about it. That was why he sighed. After sighing, he didn't hesitate to take a step forward and cross the boundary line. He then began a new round of cleaning up. Because there was no tribulation to help him, he returned to his original cautiousness. He carefully let go of the peak of the Sage-to-Be level exotic beasts, and only targeted the advanced Sage-to-Be level exotic beasts. Only when he really couldn't avoid it, or when the exotic beast at the pinnacle of the Sage-to-Be level couldn't stand his offense and wanted to personally deal with Luo Fan, would he confront the exotic beast at the pinnacle of the Sage-to-Be level. Although the exotic beasts at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level were extremely powerful, he had already killed more than 30 of them. Although he had the help of the tribulation, he had a general understanding of the characteristics of the exotic beasts at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level and knew their strengths and weaknesses. Therefore, every time he encountered the exotic beasts at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level, he could use all kinds of plans and arrangements to avert danger. He could draw the exotic beasts at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level into the internal universe of the River of Time and kill them. However, without the help of the tribulation, every time he encountered the exotic beasts at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level, it was like he had a brush with death. Every victory exhausted him mentally and physically, and he needed a rest for a long time to recover and continue fighting. Therefore, although Luo Fan could defeat his opponents every time, he was still unwilling to provoke the exotic beasts at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level. He would try his best to avoid them and only fight when he could not avoid them. Unfortunately, perhaps because he had killed too many people, his body gradually emitted a faintly discernible, strange aura, which made the exotic beasts more and more disgusted. Therefore, although he tried his best to avoid them, almost all the exotic beasts at the peak of the Sage-to-Be level started to actively seek him out and deal with him. He was almost exhausted from running for his life. If he was not strong enough and experienced enough, he might have died dozens of times. In this process of pain and happiness, 1,000 years passed. To be continued. Chapter 986. Within 1,000 years, Luo Fan had traveled hundreds of millions of miles away from the territory of the Hidden Armor sect. By killing exotic beasts at the great accomplishment and pinnacle of the Sage-to-Be realm, he had reduced the shackles of his realm to a level that could be broken at any time. The River of Time hanging above his head, which had not been withdrawn for several hundred years, shone even more brilliantly. The bright red light even overshadowed the sunlight, causing everything within a radius of tens of thousands of miles to be enveloped in a bright red light wherever he passed. I still need 25 creatures at the great accomplishment of the Sage-to-Be to break through. At this moment, Luo Fan did not look disheveled at all. Instead, he was in high spirits, as if the previous 1,000 years of running for his life did not happen to him. Originally, Luo Fan needed to kill as many as 7,874 living beings at the great perfection of the Sage-to-Be realm. Although the number of living beings he killed over the past 1,000 years did not reach this number, there were many living beings at the peak of the Sage-to-Be realm. Each of these creatures was equivalent to 30 to 40 creatures at the great accomplishment of the Sage-to-Be. At this moment, he had almost broken through the shackles of his realm. He only needed to kill 25 living beings at the great perfection quasi-sage realm, or one living being at the peak of the quasi-sage realm, to complete the process of breaking through the shackles of his realm. This would allow him to achieve the supreme breakthrough that he had been dreaming of. As Luo Fan thought to himself, he began to move toward the next exotic beast at the great accomplishment of the Sage-to-Be realm. If he chose a pinnacle of the Sage-to-Be realm, he only needed one more to complete the entire killing process. However, it was obvious that choosing a pinnacle of the Sage-to-Be realm required him to take a huge risk. If he had a choice, he would naturally not choose such an opponent. Just as he was thinking about this, a leisurely sigh was suddenly heard. Then, the entire world changed in an instant. The eternal and indestructible aura that filled the entire sanctuary seemed to be boiling at this moment. In an instant, they seemed to be boiling up slightly, and there was even a hint of joy and gratification mixed within. Why did you kill so many? Ever since you entered the holy region over 1,000 years ago, you've already killed close to 10,000 great perfection quasi-sages. I really can't let such a maniac live. These words drilled into Luo Fan's ears, causing Luo Fan's body to tremble and his eyes to reveal a serious expression. The owner of this voice, Luo Fan, was nowhere to be found. However, he was able to send this voice into his ears. This fact was enough for him to understand that the person who made this voice was definitely not simple. It was highly possible that he was in existence above the great accomplishment Sage-to-Be. In other words, it was highly likely that he was a Sage-to-Be at the peak of the Tao Master realm. The real one. A peak Sage-to-Be without any discount. In the face of such an existence, how could Luo Fan not be solemn? Especially at this time, this person even said that he couldn't stay. At this moment, the great perfection quasi-sage level exotic beast that Luo Fan had intended to keep in the inner universe of the River of Time was as tame as a kitten lying on the ground. If it wasn't for the immense pressure, it might even start wagging its tail. At this moment, the void distorted and a figure appeared out of nowhere in front of Luo Fan. This person was a handsome young man in a Taoist robe with long sleeves fluttering in the wind. He looked like an immortal, and his aura was faintly discernible. It seemed that he was extremely powerful, but at the same time, it seemed as if he didn't exist at all. At this moment, this person was looking at Luo Fan with a look of pity mixed with anger. It was as if he was looking at an ignorant child who had accidentally committed a heinous crime. As expected, it's a Sage-to-Be at the peak. Luo Fan frowned and instantly knew what kind of existence this person was. He couldn't help but be shocked. The power in his body was instantly active to the peak. The River of Time above his head, which shone over a radius of tens of thousands of miles, also changed slightly, exerting its mystery to the limit. Killing? I'm just collecting cultivation materials. How was this considered killing? Luo Fan said lightly. Although he was about to break the shackles of the realm and transcend, he was still a Tao integration expert. Although he had reached the end of the Tao integration realm, he was still a Tao integration expert. With such a cultivation realm, he had to be careful even when facing peak Sage-to-Be realm beasts that lacked spiritual wisdom. He had to use countless methods to defeat them. The cultivator in front of him was clearly a true peak Sage-to-Be. His spiritual wisdom, divine sense, and power were many times stronger than those peak Sage-to-Be realm beasts. In the face of such an existence, Yi Shiwen naturally didn't want to fight. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the man sneered and said, "Collecting cultivation materials? What kind of cultivation materials would require so many great accomplishments Sage-to-Be? I've been observing you for 300 years. During these 300 years, You didn't stop killing at all except when you were on the road. Such a style is simply the style of a demon. How can it be explained? By collecting cultivation materials. Well, since you didn't attack directly, it means there's still room for negotiation. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, but his mouth did not have the slightest hesitation as he said, "For cultivators like us, what is a few hundred years? It's not uncommon to spend hundreds of millions of years to collect cultivation materials. Moreover, my cultivation method is rather special. It requires materials from many great accomplishment sage-to-be realm beasts to cultivate. Can't I? Impossible. The great accomplishment sage-to-be you killed has nothing in common." The peak sage-to-be frowned and refuted resolutely. Haha, haven't you already mentioned the common point? They're all great accomplishment sage-to-be, Luo Fan said with a chuckle. The young man frowned, seemingly confused by Luo Fan's words. However, his expression quickly returned to anger and regret as he said, "Perhaps what you said makes sense, but the sanctuary isn't the Azura field. Although there are no restrictions on the path of cultivation, your Tao of slaughter can't be ignored. So, I can't let you live." With that, the young man didn't bother to say anything else. He raised his hand and grabbed at Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan felt as if he was bearing the weight of the entire world. The rejection of the entire universe and sanctuary. Oppression. The endless, everlasting, and indestructible aura around him crazily gathered towards him, making him feel that his body, his strength, his senses, and his will were all under unimaginable pressure. The pressure grew stronger and more terrifying. In the end, it reached an unimaginable level, making him feel as if everything about him was about to turn into powder under this pressure. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly remembered the feeling he had when he used the hidden armor sex territory to kill those great accomplishment sage-to-be realm beasts 1,000 years ago. Back then, those tribulations were also completed by relying on the omnipresent aura that seemed to be the aura of a sage. That situation, it was so similar to what he was going through now. If Luo Fan hadn't reached the level where he had comprehended almost everything, he might have said that it was retribution. So, that's how those strange beasts felt back then. It's really not good. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind at this time. The young man's attack was so sudden, but Luo Fan was already prepared. How could he not be on guard against someone who said that he couldn't live without meeting him? Because he was prepared, he was still able to resist, even though he'd encountered a tribulation similar to what the beast had encountered in the past. With a thought, the river of time above his head shook violently. It wrapped around his body and took him into the internal universe of the river of time. This was the internal universe of the river of time. Usually, it was only used to deal with enemies, but that didn't mean it could only be used to deal with enemies. After all, it was the river of time and had endless uses. Its functions couldn't be that simple. The internal universe of the river of time was able to isolate the tribulations of those beasts. At this time, it could also effectively isolate this attack that was similar to the previous tribulations. Therefore, the moment Luo Fan's figure entered the universe, the young man suddenly felt that his right hand was empty. All that was left in front of him was the bright red river that seemed to be a magic treasure, and the opponent he wanted to kill had disappeared without a trace. Do you think I can't do anything to you if you hide in a magic treasure? You underestimate the disciples of a sage. As he spoke, he put his right hand together and drew a simple but mysterious trajectory in the void. In an instant, the void of the entire sacred region shook, and a ray of light stepped out of the void. The ray of light was so bright, so dazzling, and so condensed that it was as if hundreds of millions of universes were arranged together. It directly collided with the bright red river. Although he said that he didn't care about the magic treasure, in reality, the reason he had observed Luo Fan for 300 years before making a move was because the power of the bright red river was too strange, and he couldn't find a perfect way to deal with it. Therefore, when he made a move, he used the magic power that he thought of that would be the most effective against the bright red river. This magic power was also a magic power that he had learned from the sage through his sect. Its power was so powerful that even he was shocked. However, he had absolute confidence that this magic power could easily break the bright red river. It could pull out Luo Fan. This person was said to be the disciple of a sage, but in fact he was only a disciple of a sect founded by an unnamed disciple of a sage. With such a distant relationship, claiming to be a disciple of a saint was like putting gold on his face. Therefore, even for a saint who could create millions of different kinds of divine powers with just a thought, he still needed to go around in circles and waste 300 years before he could obtain it. Nearly 10,000 great perfection quasi-sages have been absorbed into that magic treasure, but his cultivation realm hasn't improved at all. Looks like the materials he collected are still there. If I kill him, not only can I gain merit, I can also get a lot of materials out of thin air. What flashed through the young man's mind was not some noble thought. Instead, it was this kind of thought. In this dream world, or in other words, in the sacred region of this dream world, there was something that Luo Fan had never seen in other worlds, and that was merit. The more Luo Fan killed, the more peak level sage-to-be, strange beasts were provoked to deal with him. This was because of the effect of merit. The merit in the Saint region was an extremely mysterious existence. This type of existence was extremely mysterious. It normally didn't show any signs, as if it was completely useless. But when you cultivate, when you break through to the next realm, it will naturally show its importance. Cultivators with a lot of merit, whether it was cultivation or breakthrough, compared to cultivators with less merit, the more merit they had, the easier it would be. The gap between them was even greater. Some ordinary people could even become immortals overnight if they had enough merit. If some cultivators reached a certain level of merit, they might even be able to become sage-to-be or peak sage-to-be without cultivating. Of course, the amount of merit needed to reach the level of saving the world in order to accomplish such a great undertaking. Merit, on the other hand, was closely related to what living beings did. If he obeyed the rules of the sacred region, he would naturally gain merit. If one defied the rules of the sanctuary, not only would there be no merit, there would also be negative karma. Actions like saving people, like bringing blessings to the world, like actions that were beneficial to the growth of the sanctuary, these kinds of actions were in line with the rules of the sanctuary. That was the merit. For Luo Fan to kill, without any reason, and kill beasts at the peak of the sage-to-be realm and beasts at the great accomplishment and sage-to-be realm, he was doing his homework and summoning karma all the time. Because of this, the young man attacked Luo Fan. That was why he caused such a huge reaction from the aura that seemed to be the aura of a sage. That was why he was so powerful when he attacked with the help of the aura. And the reason why this young man insisted on attacking Luo Fan was precisely for the sake of obtaining merit points. At the same time, he wanted to obtain the countless cultivation materials that Luo Fan had gathered. In fact, the reason that Luo Fan gave at the beginning was the same reason. Even without him saying it, the young man already believed it. It seems that the cultivators who have just ascended from the mortal world are indeed the most naive. The young man smiled faintly and was filled with pride. Just as he was imagining that he had gained countless benefits and could completely refine the magic treasures that he wanted to refine, the blue light that appeared from the nothingness had already violently collided with Luo Fan's river of time. The shock wave produced by the collision directly tore the void apart and severed time, forming a circle of black halo that seemed to be void of time and space. It began to expand from the point of collision and continued to spread in all directions. As it spread, the void continued to collapse and turn into nothingness. Seeing this, the young man could not help but be shocked. His body trembled, and in an instant, he was pushed back tens of thousands of miles. After the dark ring of light spread out, another ring of light was produced from the point of impact, forming a concentric circle with the previous ring of light and continuing to spread out. In this manner, the rings of light seemed to push each other, causing the concentric rings of light to continuously push outwards, causing the range of the rings of light to become wider and wider. In the end, when it reached tens of thousands of miles away, it could not withstand the space-time restoration of the sacred region and gradually disappeared without a trace. In the center of the concentric circle, the blue light and the bright red river were constantly annihilating each other as they collided. Be it the blue light or the bright red river, they were constantly shrinking and weakening in the process, as if they were constantly being taken away by the black halo. The whole process was neither fast nor slow, but there was no room for relaxation. The resolute look seemed to be that it would not stop until either of the two completely disappeared. How is this possible? It is at most a great perfection, quasi-sage, magic treasure. How could it be able to resist the magic power of a sage? The young man's face was full of disbelief. Previously, he had observed Luo Fan for more than 300 years. Although he knew that the bright red river was not simple, he only thought that its function was strange and impossible to guard against. In fact, he did not think that this magic treasure was that powerful. However, the situation at this moment was completely beyond his imagination. Although the magic treasure did not obtain victory, it had indeed blocked the blue light and prevented it from advancing. This was simply the greatest absurdity in the world. As someone who was extremely superstitious about sages, his mind almost went blank. In fact, the reason why this had happened was not complicated at all. However, due to the limitations of a peak quasi-sage, he could not think of it. This world was not the real world, but a world between projection and reality. Everything in this world was the dream of a great perfection quasi-sage. The knowledge of a great perfection quasi-sage limited this entire world. For a great perfection quasi-sage, a sage, or even a peak quasi-sage, was an existence that could only be imagined and could not be fully understood. Therefore, in this dream world, be it a sage or a peak quasi-sage, they were merely sages and peak quasi-sages in his imagination. No matter how rich the imagination of a great perfection quasi-sage was, the sages and peak quasi-sages in his imagination would definitely be worlds apart from their real appearances. Perhaps this was too absolute, but it was easy to understand if one thought about it from another perspective. A great perfection quasi-sage was like a frog in a dry well. A peak quasi-sage was the bright moon in the sky. A sage was the entire universe. Given the frog's knowledge and perspective, the gap between the bright moon and the real universe that it imagined and the real moon and the real universe was obvious. Perhaps, in the frog's eyes, the bright moon was a ball of light that only appeared once in a half a day and didn't exist at other times. As for the universe, it was just a well. Chapter 987. Because of this limitation, the sages in the dream realm were supreme existences to all living beings and cultivators. They were incomparable and irresistible existences. Anyone who had the slightest connection to the sages was an invincible existence. However, to outsiders, like Luo Fan and other living creatures of the real universe, the sages were essentially not much different from great accomplishment sage to be. Moreover, although Luo Fan's River of Time was condensed by the power at the end of Tao integration, it contained the mysteries of the tide of time, which were profound and unfathomable. Even great accomplishment sage to be could not compare to it, which was why such a situation had occurred. The young man stared blankly at the unbelievable scene before him, and his heart was suddenly filled with an indescribable killing intent and greed. I must get the refining method of this magic treasure. Such a thought instantly occupied all of his thoughts, causing his entire body to tremble uncontrollably. The power around him no longer concealed at all, exploding out wildly. In an instant, the space within a radius of tens of millions of kilometers was directly separated from the outside world. The endless aura that filled the entire sacred region condensed in an instant, directly condensing into a mysterious, indescribable shape outside his body. As soon as this shape appeared, it seemed as if the entire sacred region had been condensed within it. An invincible intent emanated from it, and the entire sacred region seemed to have yielded to it in an instant. At this moment, The result of the collision between the blue light and Luo Fan's River of Time had already appeared. The River of Time was only left with an extremely weak, bright red light. However, the blue light had already disappeared without a trace. Obviously, the result of the struggle was not as one-sided as the young man had imagined. It wasn't as one-sided as the young man had imagined. Instead, it was Luo Fan's River of Time that won. Although it seemed to be an extremely tragic victory, it was still a victory after all. I can't believe you actually won. The young man smiled coldly. He lifted his hand and pointed. The strange object condensed from the endless aura in front of him suddenly trembled. As if it had transcended time and space, it directly appeared above the bright red light spot, and then suddenly shrouded the bright red light spot. At this moment, bright red light abruptly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. When a strange object struck down, the space within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was reduced to dust. However, it did not affect the bright red light at all. The young man raised his eyebrows. Although he was a peak sage to be, as mentioned before, he was merely a simulated peak sage to be. In this dream world, he was invincible except for sages. However, to Luo Fan, he was not much different from a great perfection quasi-sage. As long as he could find a way to deal with his infinite power, he would be able to deal with him like how he dealt with great accomplishment sage to be. Of course, it was quite difficult to find a way to deal with that infinite power. At this moment, Luo Fan could not find a universal method. Your Dao heart. He did not seem like a pinnacle quasi-sage at all. Instead, he seemed like a greedy commoner. This is your fatal weakness. Right at this moment, Luo Fan's voice leisurely entered the young man's ears. The young man was startled and saw a bright red light in front of him. Originally, he had a close connection with the sanctuary at all times and felt as if he controlled most of the sanctuary. In an instant, he disappeared without a trace. To him, the whole world seemed to have turned into nothingness. It was as if he had already turned into nothingness. All that was left of him was himself. All he could control was the power within his body. In an instant, an indescribable sense of loneliness surged in his heart. What's going on? Why did this happen? I'm a pinnacle sage to be with limitless magic and power. How could I be suppressed to such an extent? This was the only thought that flashed wildly in the young man's mind. At this moment, the young man's original location was no longer the young man. Instead, it was a bright red river that seemed to be only several tens of feet long at first glance. But upon closer inspection, one would discover that it seemed to be infinitely long. It was impossible to describe its length with specific numbers. This was the river of the era. It was as if it had never appeared in the first place after being blasted into a bright red spot by the blue beam of light. The young man was in the center of the bright red river. However, he was not in the universe inside the river. The power that Luo Fan used the most in the River of Time was the universe inside it. However, it was obvious that the River of Time had more than this power. It was also an extremely mysterious way to use the River of Time to envelop a living being. Even a young man at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm could not resist its magical effect. His connection with the outside world was directly cut off. As for why the bright red river appeared so quickly, the reason was simple. This river was originally a combination of powers constructed by Luo Fan's own power. Although it had many magical effects, its essence was just that. Under such circumstances, even if it was blasted to such an extent, as long as Luo Fan had enough power, he could reform it in an instant. Previously, because the young man was filled with greed and killing intent, he could not perfectly control the power that exceeded his own power. The product of the condensed aura was the condensed aura of a sage. It was not something that a cultivator at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm could control perfectly. Therefore, when Luo Fan saw that gap, he used his outstanding martial arts magic to directly pass through it and arrive behind the young man. What happened next was needless to say. He directly condensed the River of Time. After saying a few words that disturbed the young man's mind, he directly wrapped the young man in the River of Time. The reason why he did not directly bring the young man into the inner universe was that, although it was more straightforward and direct than what he did now, it was slower by 1/1000th of a second. This 1/1000th of a second was naturally not a big deal under normal circumstances. However, it was crucial in a battle at the pinnacle of the Sage-to-Be realm. It was enough to affect the outcome of the battle. Naturally, he would not take it lightly. His mind moved slightly. Luo Fan's figure appeared in the void outside. The surrounding world, which had been separated from the outside world by the thought of a peak quasi-sage, returned to normal. The object that was previously condensed from the sage aura also dispersed at this moment. As it dispersed, the void that had been bombarded into powder by the condensation also recovered. Not long after, the space within a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers was completely devoid of any abnormalities. He patted time Changhe lightly, and in an instant, the pinnacle quasi-sage youth was sucked into the inner universe. I hope you can hold on a little longer, but I think 3 days should be your limit. Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. 1,000 years ago, he had kept the first peak stage quasi-sage beast into the internal universe of the River of Time. Even then, he needed several thousand years to refine it. But after more than 1,000 years, the power of the universe within the River of Time had greatly increased. Because dozens of pinnacle Sage-to-Be level exotic beasts were killed, it could already simulate dozens of pinnacle Sage-to-Be level exotic beasts. Under such circumstances, how could a pinnacle Sage-to-Be level cultivator last long? 3 days was already an overestimation, given that he was the disciple of a so-called sage and might have many powerful means. After destroying it this time, I should be able to achieve a breakthrough. However, I need to find a good place to properly cultivate. As the thought flashed through his mind, he refined the item he had refined. A great accomplishment quasi-sage puppet had already appeared by his side. This puppet had improved a lot compared to 1,000 years ago. It looked even more mighty and valiant. After the puppet appeared, Luo Fan drilled into the small world that was opened up inside the puppet, and the River of Time above his head. Then, it shrank back into the small world. The entire void looked like only the puppet was left floating in the void. Then, the puppet general's body trembled, and the surrounding void distorted slightly. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. When it reappeared, it was in the nest of a pinnacle Sage-to-Be level exotic beast that Luo Fan had found in the past 1,000 years. Of course, the pinnacle Sage-to-Be had been killed by Luo Fan some time ago. This nest was on an extremely tall tree. It was like a huge bird's nest hidden among the dense branches and leaves. The entire tree gave off an extremely dense aura of a pinnacle Sage-to-Be level exotic beast. It was the remnant aura of that exotic beast. This aura was enough to deter any exotic beast that had the intention to offend it and ensure its safety for a period of time. Therefore, Luo Fan chose this place. After the puppet arrived at the bird's nest, it sat cross-legged at the center of the bird's nest. All of its presence was hidden, and it looked like a decoration of the bird's nest. It was no longer possible to tell that it was a powerful puppet, but more like a statue. In the inner world of the puppet, Luo Fan sat cross-legged in the center of the world. His expression was calm, but his mind had already entered the River of Time above his head and integrated into the inner universe. He began to arrange troops, control the power of the universe, and condense countless living creatures to kill the pinnacle Sage-to-Be. Although the peak quasi-sage claimed to be a disciple of the sage to make himself look good, he was still related to the sage. The most powerful divine ability, the most powerful means, the most exquisite, and the most reasonable imagination of the great completion quasi-sage who created this dreamscape was manifested in his body. Therefore, the pinnacle Sage-to-Be was more than 100 times stronger than ordinary pinnacle Sage-to-Be level exotic beasts. Even though there were dozens of pinnacle Sage-to-Be level exotic beasts in the inner universe, thousands of Sage-to-Be level exotic beasts, and countless other strange living creatures equivalent to the end of Tao integration, the battle was extremely difficult and it was not easy to deal with them. Originally, this universe used its own function to mobilize power to kill the pinnacle sage-to-be. Although it could fully exert the power of the countless exotic beasts, it was still lacking in intelligence. Now, with the addition of Luo Fan's mind, the power exerted by the countless forces was greatly increased. In the blink of an eye, the pinnacle sage-to-be was at a disadvantage, constantly oppressing and exhausting his power, so that he could only watch as he fell bit by bit without a trace of hope. Is this how those exotic beasts feel? Why is my connection with the sect cut off? Even the sacrificial jade tablet given by the sage to my sect has completely lost its luster. What kind of magic treasure is this? The young man's mind was in a mess, and he kept defending against the attacks that came from all directions. At the same time, he was thinking of all kinds of answers. At this moment, he still did not realize that Luo Fan's River of Time was not a magic treasure, but a kind of divine sense. Luo Fan looked at the restless young man and could not help shaking his head. I didn't expect a pinnacle sage-to-be's Tao heart to be so weak. What a pity. Such a thought flashed through his mind. One should be calm in battle, no matter what the situation was. No matter what questions one had, one should face the battle calmly. Although this young man was a pinnacle sage-to-be, he could not even do this, which naturally made him look down on him. The young man blocked left and right, unleashing all kinds of exquisite magical powers, killing one strange beast after another, regardless of whether they were at the peak of the sage-to-be realm. Whether it was a pinnacle sage-to-be or a great accomplishment sage-to-be, they did not seem to be a match for one of his moves. He almost killed one beast at a time, and two at a time. However, due to the unique magical effects of the universe, no matter how many exotic beasts he killed, many exotic beasts of the same level were born at the same time. It was endless and never stopped. Under such circumstances, the pinnacle sage-to-be gradually became dispirited, and his state of mind gradually lost balance. There were more and more flaws and weaknesses in his movements. In the end, 2 days later, he finally could not hold back the irritation in his heart. He used a divine sense that would drag the enemy down with him, and directly destroyed all the living creatures in the universe. In the process, he turned into powder and disappeared without a trace. It's only been 2 days. It seems that I overestimated you. Luo Fan could not help but sigh. At this moment, he suddenly felt an indescribable strange feeling welling up in his heart. The shackles that had been restraining him seemed to have turned into a pile of sand. Although they still existed, it seemed like he could break through them with a gentle push. As for the River of Time, it instantly turned around, and all the bright red light converged. The entire bright red river looked like it had been carved out of bright red jade. There was an indescribable warmth in the bright red, and it made people feel extremely comfortable with just a glance, as if they wanted to touch it. Sensing this change, Luo Fan could not help but reveal an indescribable joy. He directly withdrew the long river of time into his body and slowly closed his eyes. Everything in his body began to operate, including his strength, body, mental strength, perception, mind, spirit, and so on. Everything began to operate in an indescribable and mysterious way. This operation caused everything in his body to continuously condense into one place. His strength, body, mental strength, spirit, perception, mind, everything gradually became one in this process. A sense of transcendence gradually emanated from his body. This sense of detachment continued to increase and become stronger as time passed. In the end, it surpassed the limit that he had reached when he was at the end of the Tao integration realm. It permeated the entire world, the puppet's body, the sacred region, and the entire dream world. It gradually dyed the bridge of time, adding an indescribable sense of detachment to it. After an unknown amount of time, Luo Fan's expression became solemn. The product that he had condensed into a single point carried a kind of aura that could destroy the boundless world and even break the primal chaos. It fiercely blasted towards the realm shackles that prevented his cultivation from advancing. The realm shackles were shackles that locked a cultivator's realm and prevented him from breaking through them. Even though such shackles were on the verge of collapse and seemed to have become a pile of sand that could collapse at any time, it was not easy to break them. When the product that Luo Fan had condensed into one place blasted against the realm shackles that seemed to have been piled up with sand and seemed like they would collapse with a gentle breeze, were like eternal barriers. Let alone collapse, they did not even tremble at all. It was as if the bombardment that could destroy the endless world and even break the chaos was just a gentle breeze. Faced with this situation, Luo Fan was not surprised at all. Of course, breaking through the realm shackles was not that easy. Although he couldn't say that he had expected this situation, he wasn't surprised either. With this mentality, he did not hesitate at all. He condensed everything again and continued to bombard the realm shackles in an even more ferocious manner. He did not hold back and did not consider the consequences. He bombarded the realm shackles crazily and desperately. The result of this bombardment was no different from the previous one. The realm shackles that seemed like they would collapse with a gentle breeze did not shake at all. Luo Fan's expression didn't change in the slightest. He retreated, reformed, and blasted again. Retreated again, reformed again, and blasted again. Just like this, once, twice, thrice, 4 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, 1,000,000 times. As Luo Fan bombarded the realm shackles, the sense of detachment on his body became stronger and more obvious. More and more of the bridge of time was being influenced by it. After an unknown period of time, when Luo Fan had bombarded the realm shackles for more than 120 billion times, an invisible roar shook his whole body. An indescribable feeling of great freedom and detachment instantly filled Luo Fan's mind. At that moment, Luo Fan knew that the realm shackles had been broken. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 988. Breaking through the shackles of the cultivation realm could only mean one thing. That was, Luo Fan had broken through his original cultivation realm and achieved the transcendence realm that he had always dreamed of. After tirelessly cultivating for so many years, and even traversing across several dream realms, killing thousands of demisage beasts, dozens of pinnacle demisage beasts, and one pinnacle demisage cultivator, he had finally broken through the barrier between the Tao integration realm and the transcendence realm. In the end, he had become a transcendent being. In the instant that he became a transcendent being, an indescribable feeling instantly appeared in his mind and consciousness. His body, his consciousness, his spirit, his power, and everything about him seemed to have completely transcended all restraints in this instant. Regardless of whether it was the holy region or the dream realm, everything seemed to have become illusory at this instant. He hovered in the void as if he was directly hovering above the Era Bridge. Looking up, he could see the vortex at the end of the Era Bridge. It was an existence known as the Era Vortex. I finally succeeded. A long sigh rang out. Luo Fan's entire body trembled. The power within his body, the toughness of his body, the strength of his spirit, his will, his perception, and everything else in this instant began to rise in an unimaginable manner. In the blink of an eye, it had already risen to more than 10,000 times its original level. The world in his eyes completely changed at this instant. The dream realm, the Era Bridge, and even the earth and the universe all disappeared from his eyes in this instant. What appeared in his eyes was only a gray haze, as if there was no time. There was no space, yet there seemed to be infinite time. There seemed to be no matter or energy in this boundless space, yet there seemed to be infinite matter and energy. This strange existence appeared directly in front of Luo Fan's eyes. This was the state of chaos. This was a state that Luo Fan had been aware of ever since he began cultivating. However, even when he was at the Tao integration realm, he still could not fully grasp it. This state of chaos that he could only vaguely sense appeared directly in front of him. It was like a young girl who had completely removed her clothes and was waiting for him to wantonly explore. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's vision shifted slightly. His eyes were enveloped by a bright red light, and in an instant, a boundless world appeared in front of him. This. This was the Earth universe, a great world that spanned an unknown number of light years and contained an unknown number of galaxies and an unknown number of living beings. At this moment, the sky and Earth were filled with bright red. The entire world. It was as if the bright red light had complete control over it. It was as if all the changes and movements were happening according to the rules set by the bright red light. This bright red light was tens of thousands of times brighter and more dazzling than Luo Fan's River of Time. If this was the sun, then the River of Time that Luo Fan had unleashed. They were like fireflies. The gap between the two was huge and terrifying. At this moment, the bright red that enveloped the entire universe seemed to be stable as a whole, but it was slightly surging and rippling in certain areas. Every single surge and ripple contained the most profound profundities of the Grand Tao and the boundless truths of the world. This was the trend of the times. It was the profundities that allowed Luo Fan to overcome every obstacle with just a trace of the profundities. He could even easily challenge those of a higher realm. The trend of the times permeated the entire Earth universe. With an irresistible stance, it caused the Earth universe to shift from the cultivation era to the Dharma ending era, and then to the next era after the Dharma ending era. Ordinary peaks sages to be wouldn't be able to see the state of chaos as easily as Luo Fan did. The reason for this was that their cultivation paths were different. Although ordinary peak sages to be's cultivation realm was on par with the transcendent realm, they didn't have their own worldview and didn't have the concept of their own worldview. Therefore, no matter how strong they were still confined to the perfect world. It was impossible for them to transcend the worldview of the creator of the perfect world. Naturally, they wouldn't be able to see the state of chaos. However, this didn't mean that peak sages to be couldn't be compared to the transcendent realm. Peak sages to be had many magical powers that the transcendent realm didn't have. If one were to make a detailed distinction between the two, they wouldn't be superior. At most, they would focus on different things. Peak sages to be cultivated the Tao passed down by the sages. They would walk step by step towards the sage realm according to the original path designed by the sages. As long as one's pace was stable, one's comprehension was good enough, and one had enough opportunities and time, one would naturally be able to reach the sage realm after countless years and obtain eternal life and indestructible Tao. As for the transcendent realm, one cultivated a self-created technique. It was a cultivator who cultivated according to his own nature and worldview. In the end, he would be able to transcend the world and the path designed by the sages and achieve eternal life and indestructible Tao. The difference between the two paths resulted in the transcendent realm being able to see the true state of chaos, while peak sages to be could only see the various things inside the world. Of course, because peak sages to be focused on the world, their control over the rules, principles, and even the great Tao within the world wasn't comparable to that of the transcendent realm. It could be said that there were gains and losses. On the other hand, Luo Fan was able to see the era tide. Although he was a transcendent realm being and not an ordinary peak sage to be, more importantly, he had already grasped a trace of the era tide's mysteries. The reason why he could see the era tide was because he was a transcendent realm being and not an ordinary peak sage to be. More importantly, he had grasped a trace of the era tide's mysteries. In other words, if he hadn't coincidentally comprehended a trace of the era tide's mysteries, he wouldn't have been able to see the bright red earth, even if he had become a transcendent realm being. Looking at the bright red in front of him, Luo Fan didn't hesitate at all. He focused all his attention on the bright red and began to use all methods to comprehend the mysteries within. The trace of the era tide's mysteries could give him the ability to challenge those at a higher level. If he could comprehend more of the era tide's mysteries, to what extent would he grow? Just thinking about it made him excited. How could Luo Fan endure it? If he were to comprehend the era tide's mysteries out of thin air, it would naturally be extremely difficult. He might not even be able to find a way for a long time. However, Luo Fan had the trace of mysteries he had comprehended in the past as a guide. All he needed to do was cut in, and he could begin to comprehend it. Needless to say, the Eretide's mysteries were extremely difficult to comprehend. Even though he had a starting point, Luo Fan's speed of comprehension was still relatively slow. As he comprehended, the Eretide above his head began to turn brighter and brighter, becoming more and more mysterious. At this moment, he was already floating in the dream world. In the bird's nest, the great perfection sage-to-be puppet had already transformed into 365 universes, which constantly revolved around his body like satellites. As for the countless bright red threads, they had merged into the river of time at some point in time. As the scarlet color of the river increased, as the profundities increased, the river of time began to melt. In the end, after an unknown period of time, the entire bright red river had turned into a huge bright red sun. It floated above Luo Fan's head and rotated slightly. As for the power that formed the long river, it had already entered his body and was elevated to the transcendent realm within his body. The power that was moving towards the source of power had fused once again. As the mysteries of the Eretide increased and the nature of the power changed, the combination of powers that he had deduced in the past, which could unleash the Eretide's might to its greatest extent, was no longer perfect. Naturally, it would no longer be able to form the Eretide. In fact, the great perfection sage-to-be puppet had collapsed because of this change. It was also because of this change that it collapsed. After all, it was the mysteries of the Eretide that had linked the 365 universes together. Even though the increase in mysteries seemed like a good thing, it was definitely not a good thing for the intricate sacred art. That was why the puppet collapsed, and the Eretide turned into a bright red sun. Just as Luo Fan was comprehending the Eretide of the real Earth's universe in the dream world, an unparalleled pressure descended from the sky and landed on his body. This pressure was supreme, noble, and powerful. It was as if a supreme god was looking down on him. The owner of this pressure was not a sage, but a pinnacle sage-to-be. He seemed to be in the same realm as the pinnacle sage-to-be who had died by his hands. However, the pressure he exuded was tens of thousands of times stronger than that youth. Agitated by this pressure, Luo Fan suddenly snapped out of the process of comprehending the mysteries of the Eretide. He shifted his gaze and looked at the source of the pressure. It was high up in the sky, tens of thousands of miles away from where he was. There was a Taoist in a light yellow Taoist robe hovering there. There seemed to be a world above the Taoist's head. At this moment, the Taoist was looking down at Luo Fan with a dignified gaze. His gaze contained a kind of indifference, as if Luo Fan was already a dead person that he could deal with at will. "Are you the one who killed my martial nephew?" The Taoist spoke in an indifferent tone when he was tens of thousands of miles away from Luo Fan. From the looks of it, it was as if he was unwilling to get any closer to Luo Fan. "You're right. If it's him, then it's him." Although Luo Fan was awakened from his comprehension of the Eretide, he was not angry. After all, given his current cultivation, he could comprehend the mysteries of the Eretide at any time. Under such circumstances, it was not a loss for him to be awakened, so there was no need to be angry. As he spoke, he casually condensed a peak sage-to-be youth that he had killed previously in front of him. The Taoist looked at the youth condensed by Luo Fan with a cold glint in his eyes. He said, "It's him. Did he tell you that he's a disciple of a sage?" "He did say that." Luo Fan was in a good mood and did not mind talking nonsense with the Taoist, so he answered the Taoist's questions. What he said is true. Although his master was only a disciple in name, he was a sage's disciple after all. His disciple status is not something you can compare to. Since you killed him, you'll have to pay for it with your life, the Taoist said. He raised his hand and pressed down on Luo Fan. In an instant, a gigantic hand directly descended from the sky and pressed towards Luo Fan's position. Its speed and power were truly earth-shattering. The gigantic hand had yet to reach Luo Fan's position, but the palm wind had already caused the land within a radius of tens of thousands of miles to sink several hundred feet into the area that was covered by the palm. The ancient forest was razed to the ground by the palm and turned into a deep pit. It was impossible to tell that it was originally a forest. If Luo Fan had still been in the Tao integration realm, he would have had to rely on the protection of the River of Time to escape this pressure. However, he was different now. He had truly transcended. The power of his divine ability was more than 10,000 times stronger than before. Under such circumstances, he did not need to rely on the River of Time at all. With a slight thought, he broke through space-time and bypassed the palm. He appeared in front of the Taoist, hundreds of thousands of miles above the void. The dream realm was a world between reality and projection. Luo Fan could not directly attack the root of all projections like he had with the projection world. No matter how powerful the projections were, he could destroy them directly, even when he had still been in the Tao integration realm. This world between reality and projection was not much different from reality to him. He also needed to abide by the laws within it. This made him abide by the great Tao. However, he had already transcended the dream realm. Even if he could not easily kill the living beings in this world that were stronger than him, he could still easily break through the restrictions of most of the laws in this world. At the moment, he used this method to directly break through the restrictions of the time law and space law of the dream realm. While the Taoist had completely sealed everything, he easily broke through the restrictions and appeared in front of him. When Luo Fan arrived in front of the Taoist frowned, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. However, he was still high and mighty, still full of confidence. Obviously, he thought that even if Luo Fan had some supernatural abilities that exceeded his expectations, he would still not be a threat to him. Luo Fan looked at the Taoist with a puzzled look on his face. Then, he suddenly came to a realization. So it's you. You've really worn out iron shoes in fruitless search, only to find it by chance. Deliberately mystifying. The Taoist sneered and turned his hand. The palm below was empty, and a mysterious light that was as clear as water turned into a palm that was 3 meters wide and grabbed at Luo Fan. The palm this time was completely different from the palm that had a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Although the palm this time was small, it gave off the aura of a saint. In other words, it was the kind of aura that could fill the entire sanctuary, the kind that could not be worn down by thousands of tribulations, and the kind of aura that was eternal and immortal. Moreover, the aura of this palm was not rootless. Instead, it was as if the palm was the source of the aura of the entire sacred region. It was as if the existence of this palm was the reason why the entire sacred region was filled with such an aura. Being locked on by this aura, even though Luo Fan was already a transcendent being, he could not help but feel that there was nowhere to hide and that he could not resist. This feeling was completely different from the tribulation that was condensed by the aura of a sage in order to kill him. This feeling was more dangerous, more shocking, and more difficult to deal with. Fortunately, I've already broken through. Luo Fan chuckled. His figure flickered, and he directly broke through the restrictions of the dream world's laws. He directly broke away from the aura's lock and appeared in another direction in front of the Taoist. Seeing this, the Taoist's expression finally changed. How could you escape the lock of Master's aura? He couldn't help but spit out these words. His absolute confidence was slightly shaken. Do you remember how you became a peak quasi-sage? Luo Fan did not answer the Taoist's question. Instead, he smiled and asked the Taoist. His words contained a thunder-like vibration, which broke through the laws of the dreamland world and directly affected the mind of the Taoist. The Taoist involuntarily pondered over his question and recalled the entire process of becoming a peak quasi-sage. Did you feel that it was so smooth that it seemed fake? Did you feel that the specific process was vague? Did you find that your current divine sense is no different from the original one? Luo Fan smiled and continued to throw one question after another at the Taoist in an unhurried voice. The Taoist stood there blankly with a blank expression on his face. Why is it like this? Why can't I remember the details? He murmured, his body gradually trembling. The auspicious cloud above his head gradually collapsed and dissipated as he muttered to himself. Because this whole world is your dream. When Luo Fan saw this, he knew that his words had an effect. With a slight smile, He sent this answer that was enough to shake the Taoist to the point that the sky and earth split apart into the mind of the Taoist, causing all the thoughts of the Taoist to instantly gather on this sentence. After a long time, the Taoist's aura shook and continued to weaken in an unimaginable way. The auspicious cloud above his head also collapsed in an instant, turning into a gust of wind and scattering in all directions. So this is my dream. The Taoist let out a long sigh, as if he had lost something. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 989. This Taoist was none other than the master of the dream world. He was also the great completion demi-sage who had created the dream world that the treasure spirit of the epic bridge had sent down. As for why the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be would show the Tao attainment of a peak sage-to-be in the dream realm, it was because the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be's desire to break through the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be and become a peak sage-to-be. Therefore, in the dream realm, he fulfilled his desire to break through from the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be to the peak sage-to-be. The reason why Luo Fan woke him up was not complicated. It was to reduce his own troubles and make it easier for him to deal with this great accomplishment sage-to-be. Before this great accomplishment sage-to-be woke up, he had always thought that he was a peak sage-to-be. In this dream world, he could naturally exert the power of a peak sage-to-be. Although this power was much weaker than that of a real peak sage-to-be, it was definitely much stronger than that of a great accomplishment sage-to-be. If he was allowed to do as he wished, it would be extremely troublesome for Luo Fan. Now that he had woken up, the situation was different. As a great accomplishment sage-to-be, this person was obviously very strong-willed. He had a deep understanding of the limits of his abilities. Therefore, after knowing that he was not a real peak sage-to-be, even if he could control the entire dream world and borrow the power of this dream world to exert unimaginable power, there would definitely be a limit. He would not be as unscrupulous as a peak sage-to-be. What a good plan. May I know who you are, and why did you appear in my dream world? The Taoist sighed. The Taoist sighed and said to Luo Fan, I just have to fight with you because of some matters, Luo Fan said with a smile. I see. I didn't expect such a thing to happen. The Taoist sighed again. He raised his eyes and looked around. Everything in the holy realm and the entire dream world had been completely absorbed into his mind and will at this moment. He was the master of this dream world. Before he woke up, he was still restricted by the rules of this dream world, even though he was a peak sage-to-be. He could not control this world perfectly. But after waking up, he naturally accepted his identity as the master of Dreamscape, and he could naturally control the entire world perfectly. This ability to grasp all the information in the entire world in an instant was nothing strange. Looking at this boundless world, the Taoist couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect my dream to be so grand. This is something I've never thought about. The dreamland is the world that every cultivator yearns for the most, the deepest desire. With your cultivation, how could you be stingy when you're dreaming? Luo Fan chuckled. At this moment, the two of them were floating in the void like two old friends. Fellow Taoist, are you in a hurry to fight me? That Taoist suddenly asked. No hurry. Luo Fan thought of something. With a faint smile, he shook his head and said, Since you're not in a hurry, why don't you follow me to take a look at the world I created in my dream? The Taoist laughed. Why not? Luo Fan didn't reject this seemingly ridiculous suggestion. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the Taoist smiled. He raised his hand and a door appeared in the void. This door was a space-time door. Looking at how distorted it was, the distance one could travel through would be unimaginably long. Fellow Taoist, please. The Taoist smiled. Luo Fan nodded and followed the Taoist into the door. In an instant, the feeling of space-time shifting surged into Luo Fan's heart. This feeling lasted for a while before it calmed down. The moment it calmed down, Luo Fan sensed it and found that the distance he had traveled when he passed through the door was at least hundreds of trillions of kilometers away. Even if he wanted to rush over, it would take him a few days. Here was a boundless ocean. Ever since I was young, I've longed to see the ocean before the world was destroyed. What did the boundless ocean look like? What did it feel like to look up at such an ocean? How huge were the waves of the ocean? Everything was a mystery to me. Ever since I gained the ability to leave the planet, I've been searching for an ocean in the universe that can make me feel that way. Unfortunately, although there are countless planets and oceans in the universe, I can see the end of those oceans at a glance. I can't feel that mysterious feeling at all. It's completely different from the ocean in my imagination. I didn't expect to see such an ocean in my dream world today. The Taoist said with some enchantment. His eyes looked at the boundless ocean in front of him. The ocean was dotted with black dots in the distance. Those were all huge islands. Even the smallest one was several times bigger than Earth. The entire ocean was not calm. From time to time, there would be extremely high waves crashing against the shore. There were also countless strange creatures living in the ocean. Some of them were ordinary fish, while others were aquatic beasts. There were all kinds of oddities, opening one's horizons. I don't have such a feeling. But I understand, Luo Fan said with a smile. He did understand this feeling. As long as a cultivator entered the path of immortality and obtained longevity, they would naturally have a perspective that surpassed mortals. When an immortal looked at an ocean on a planet, they would be able to see the undulating arc of the ocean. They wouldn't be able to see far before discovering the truth of the ocean. They wouldn't have the same feeling as ordinary people. If the size of the planet was unimaginable, millions of times bigger than the sun, then immortals would naturally feel that the sky was round and the earth was square. However, even such a huge planet was like a small pond to a cultivator at Luo Fan's level, and he could see through it with a single glance. In a situation where everything could be seen through a glance, it was impossible to feel the same shock as ordinary people would feel when looking at the ocean. This was naturally impossible. This wasn't a big deal for ordinary cultivators. It was fine even if they couldn't feel it. But for a cultivator who had been looking forward to the ocean since he was young, this was a painful thing to do. However, I believe that with your abilities, it shouldn't be difficult for you to create a world and an ocean like this. Luo Fan smiled. It's possible. However, I created it myself after all. I know everything about it clearly. The feeling of having everything under control will be completely destroyed. It's better if I didn't come. I might as well not have come. The Taoist sighed as he looked at the sea in front of him. Is the ocean in front of us different from the one you created yourself? Don't you have complete control over the entire world now? Luo Fan asked with a smile. How can it be the same? Although I took a look at the world just now, I purposely let go of the ocean. I only found the approximate location of the ocean. It won't ruin my feeling because of this negligence. The Taoist seemed very proud. Hee. Luo Fan only smiled. I know what you want to say. Are you going to say that this is just something I created in my dream? It's equivalent to gathering my feelings in one place to form an ocean. I'm just deceiving myself. The Taoist looked at Luo Fan and smiled. Luo Fan didn't refute and nodded. Ha! I believe that if we meet in the real universe, we will become good friends. The Taoist saw that Luo Fan actually nodded. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. I also admire you quite a bit. Luo Fan also smiled. Although the two were smiling, they had no intention of exchanging names, nor did they have any intention of exchanging contact information in the real universe. Luo Fan knew that it was useless even if they exchanged names. He and this person were not in the same space-time. Apart from this time in the dream world, there was no possibility of any interaction between them. Naturally, there was no need to exchange contact information to add to the trouble. As for the Taoist, he was obviously worried about Luo Fan and didn't want to have too much of a relationship with him. Although the Taoist appeared to be relaxed and open-minded, he still had some doubts about why he suddenly had such a dream. He didn't cultivate the dream cultivation technique and was usually proud of being awake. Back when he was able to control his emotions perfectly, he had never had a single dream in the past hundreds of millions of years. However, at this moment, after he became a great stage quasi-sage, he suddenly had such a realistic dream when he was cultivating in seclusion. Moreover, There was a great sage, quasi-sage, whose cultivation was slightly lower than his, but seemed to be stronger than him in his dream. How could he not be worried and be as open-minded as he appeared to be? Although this place was created in my dream, and my feelings are gathered in one place, this is the most perfect ocean in my heart. Perhaps the ocean before the heaven and earth shattered in my heart was far inferior to the ocean in front of me. At my current realm, isn't this the kind of feeling I'm pursuing? The Taoist explained to Luo Fan after he finished laughing. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh and said, "Taoist friend, I admire your open-mindedness." Haha, I'm done for today. Why don't we start now? The Taoist laughed and said to Luo Fan, "That's exactly what I wanted." Luo Fan smiled and waved his hand. The 365 universes around him were suddenly sprung up by a bright red thread and condensed into a human-shaped puppet. After this puppet was formed, its aura began to rise continuously and finally stabilized after reaching a realm that was 100 times stronger than before. Moreover, the bright red sun that originally existed above Luo Fan's head had already disappeared without a trace. After the puppet had completely stabilized, Luo Fan said, "Please." He controlled the puppet to pounce towards the Taoist. In the blink of an eye, it seemed to transcend time and space and directly appeared in front of the Taoist. It raised its hand and blasted towards the Taoist. The Taoist smiled slightly and didn't move. However, a 10-acre large auspicious cloud appeared above his head. There were 3 Taoists on the auspicious cloud. These 3 Taoists looked very strange. One of them had a very strong sense of existence, as if it was the most real existence in the universe. The other didn't have any sense of existence at all, as if it was a shadow. People who saw it couldn't help but ignore it. As for the last one, it was a complete void. Although it existed there, it seemed like it was the most spacious place in the world, as if it was the embodiment of nothingness. Among the 3 Taoists, the one that seemed to be the most real existence in the world took a step and arrived in front of the Taoist, directly blocking Luo Fan's puppet. These are the 3 corpses. From the looks of it, they seem to be the 3 corpses of nothingness, Luo Fan thought when he saw the 3 Taoists. This Taoist was the one that Luo Fan had seen since he started to wander the dream world and met many great accomplishment quasi-sages. The first was a great accomplishment quasi-sage who could slay the 3 corpses. The great accomplishment quasi-sage realm was originally just a realm in the universe on Earth. However, because the gap was too large, it was divided into 5 realms: beginner, small accomplishment, middle accomplishment, great accomplishment, and pinnacle. If one cultivated the 3 corpses slaying technique and became a great accomplishment quasi-sage, they would be able to sense one of the 3 corpses. However, they would need to use a magic treasure that was suitable for slaying the 3 corpses to slay one of the corpses. Otherwise, they would need to continue accumulating until they could slay one of the corpses. As for small accomplishment quasi-sage, they would slay one of the 3 corpses. Similarly, middle accomplishment quasi-sage would slay 2 corpses. Great accomplishment quasi-sage would slay 3 corpses. As for pinnacle quasi-sage, they would fuse 3 corpses into one's body. Only after a breakthrough would they be able to step into the sage realm, becoming a supreme sage. Although Luo Fan had seen many great accomplishment quasi-sages in the previous few dream worlds, he had never seen a great accomplishment quasi-sage who could slay 3 corpses. The reason for this was probably because the great completion quasi-sage in the previous few dream worlds did not cultivate the severing the 3 corpses Tao. He did not understand this Tao, so he was unwilling to create it in the dream world. And in this dream world, perhaps this great accomplishment quasi-sage had some lingering arrogance in his heart. He believed that he was the only one who could slay all 3 corpses and that other living beings could not do it. It was precisely because of these inexplicable reasons that Luo Fan had never seen a true quasi-saint who had severed the 3 corpses in these dream worlds. He had never even seen a quasi-saint who had severed the 3 corpses. Does each of the 3 corpses have the strength of the main body? Luo Fan was very curious about the three corpses slaying technique. He could not help but try to figure out the uses of the three corpses. The Taoist corpses clashed with Luo Fan's puppets. The two of them engaged in an intense battle. Needless to say, Luo Fan's puppets were more than 100 times stronger than before. They were even stronger than ordinary great accomplishment quasi-sages. They had all kinds of magical abilities in battle. Every move they made had the power to shatter the heavens and the earth. The corpses were also very shocking. They had all kinds of mysterious characteristics. In the entire universe, they seemed to be the most real, and everything else was fake. Any attack that hit them seemed to be greatly weakened. Only a small part of the attack could exert its original power and cause some damage to them. It was as if these attacks had become illusory the moment they came into contact with him. This was the use of absolute reality. This was the use of the corpses. Fortunately, the puppets had the support of the mysteries of the tide of the times. Every attack would add the mysteries of the corpses to their attacks, so the mysteries of the corpses were not very effective. As a result, they were in a stalemate. The two of them fought back and forth. The battle was earth-shattering and chaotic. At this moment, the remaining two corpses on top of the Taoist's head stood up and took a step out of the cloud. They pounced at Luo Fan and started to attack Luo Fan. The void corpse was illusory, just like a shadow. Any attack that landed on its body seemed to have landed on an illusory image, unable to cause any damage to it at all. As for the corpse, it was neither real nor fake. It was absolute nothingness. Even though it existed there, it seemed like it was a gap between the heavens and the earth. Any attack that was thrown into it would be devoured, and it would disappear without a trace. Facing these two corpses, Luo Fan was very interested. He used the opportunity of fighting them to observe the uses of these two corpses. He tried to understand the mysteries of these two corpses and used them to understand the mysteries of the three corpses slaying technique. Luo Fan knew how to cultivate the three corpses slaying technique and could even casually create the three corpses slaying technique. However, as for what it would be like to cultivate the three corpses slaying technique to the great completion of Quasi-Saint Realm, how different it would be from his speculation, and whether there were any mysteries that he had not discovered yet, he needed to research to find out. Now that there was such a good opportunity in front of him, how could he give it up so easily? Although these two corpses had endless uses, they could even deal with Luo Fan's puppets. Luo Fan had a deeper understanding of the mysteries of the tide of the times. How could he not be able to deal with them? Therefore, even though he did not defeat the two corpses quickly, he did not end up in a difficult situation because of their attacks. It seemed like he was constantly dodging, but every time he counterattacked, the two corpses would not be able to catch their breath for a long time. That Taoist was watching the battle from the side. Finally, he had an idea and joined the siege of Luo Fan's puppets. Obviously, although he knew that Luo Fan was the key, he thought that it would be difficult to defeat Luo Fan if he and the two corpses worked together. Therefore, he planned to defeat Luo Fan's puppets first and then combine the power of the three corpses to attack Luo Fan together with him to defeat him and win the battle. Unfortunately, he underestimated the puppets refined by Luo Fan. The strength of the puppets itself was secondary. If it was just that, not to mention the combination of the Taoist and the corpses, even the corpses would be able to defeat it easily. What was more difficult to deal with was the mysteries of the tide of the times. This mysteries not only allowed him to attack the corpses, but also allowed him to do many things that normal great completion sage to be couldn't do. This made it more difficult to deal with than the Taoist had imagined. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 990. The Taoist and his corpses attacked Luo Fan's puppets together. As great perfection quasi-sages, their battle prowess was naturally not weak. As they fought, the void collapsed and shattered. Universes were created and destroyed one after another. The entire holy region seemed to shake violently. Although the sage domain was huge, the space and time within it were very stable. Logically speaking, a battle between great perfection sage to be would not cause much of a reaction. This could be seen from the way Luo Fan attacked those strange beasts of great perfection sage to be. However, the situation was different now. The one fighting now was the master of dreamscape, the great perfection quasi-sage who had created this dreamscape. Although his body was not much different from the greater success of quasi-saint avatar in dreamscape, he could control the entire saint region and dreamscape. In the process of battle, he could mobilize the power of the entire dreamscape to attack his opponent. This kind of mobilization would obviously cause all sorts of violent changes in dreamscape. Such changes were similar to the aftermath of the battle, causing the entire dreamscape to shake violently. Although this Taoist had mobilized the power of the entire dream world, and every move he made was enough to destroy the world, his cultivation realm was only at the level of quasi-sage great accomplishment. This power was limited by his cultivation realm, and there were many flaws that a great perfection quasi-sage could find. These flaws were even more obvious in the eyes of Luo Fan, who had already transcended. After all, this world was a world between reality and projection. In his eyes, there were no secrets. Therefore, even if the great perfection quasi-sage mobilized the power of dreamscape to help him fight, he would not be able to hide anything. Luo Fan and his puppet didn't show any signs of defeat at all. They were still fighting back and forth with the Taoist and his 3 corpses. During the battle, Luo Fan gained a deeper understanding of the transcendent realm, and the power of his divine abilities grew stronger. Moreover, countless divine abilities of the transcendent realm were created and blasted at the Taoist and his 3 corpses. 10 days later, Luo Fan's body suddenly shook, and he laughed out loud. He lifted his hand and pointed. Tens of millions of streams of power rushed out of his body and gathered into a bright red river in the void. This bright red river was magnificent. Compared to the bright red river that Luo Fan had condensed before, it was countless times longer and stronger. As soon as this bright red river appeared, almost half of the dreamscape was enveloped by its bright red light. In an instant, the Taoist's control over half of the dream world was instantly weakened. The Taoist had originally relied on the power of the dream world to fight against Luo Fan and his puppets, but now he had suddenly lost control of more than half of the dream world. It was obvious how great the impact this had on him was. In an instant, the Taoist and his 3 corpses were suppressed by Luo Fan and his puppets. Seeing this, how could Luo Fan still be polite to him? His heart moved. With a thought, the incomparably huge time river above his head suddenly turned and wrapped around the Taoist and his 3 corpses, pulling them into the internal universe of the time river. At this moment, the number of universes in the time river was not limited to 1. Instead, it was endless. It was as if there were as many as he wanted. The number of universes in the time river did not increase one by one. The number depended on Luo Fan's understanding of the mysteries of the time tide. In the past, his understanding of the time tide was only a trace, so naturally, he could only create 1 universe. But now, although his understanding of the time tide was not countless times greater than before, as long as he could create 2 universes, it meant that he had broken the limit of 1 universe. Since the limit was broken, there was naturally no more. If he could create 2 universes, he could create countless universes. At this moment, the Taoist's 3 corpses and himself were scattered in 4 universes, enduring the attacks of countless living beings. Because Luo Fan's cultivation realm had broken through the Tao integration realm and reached the transcendent realm, the living beings that he simulated were no longer limited to the Tao integration realm. Instead, they were all at the great perfection quasi-sage realm. Countless great perfection quasi-sage living beings besieged the Taoist. Even though the Taoist cultivated the 3 corpses slaying Tao and was much more powerful than ordinary great perfection quasi-sages, he was still no match for them. In fact, there was no need for Luo Fan to control them. In just a short day, the Taoist and his 3 corpses had been forced into a hopeless situation. In the end, because this was the dream realm, they disappeared from the dream realm when they were about to be killed by the countless living beings. The dream realm gradually collapsed with their disappearance and turned into nothingness in a short while. Obviously, The Taoist woke up from his sleep the moment he died. Arriving at this absolute nothingness, Luo Fan let out a long sigh. I'm finally done. This is the 9,994th stage. Next, there's still 5 more stages. Do I have to continue like this? He said with an inexplicable expression on his face. Back when he was still at the Tao integration stage, he had already been able to see the truth of this void if he wanted to. However, he still needed to activate his power and adjust the perspective of a Tao integration realm expert to be able to do that. At this moment, he did not need to do anything at all. When he looked up, the nothingness disappeared from his eyes and revealed a huge planet that was pierced by a crescent moon-shaped arch bridge. This arch bridge was originally extremely long, and there were 9,994 huge planets that were strung on the bridge behind Luo Fan. In front of Luo Fan, there were 5 planets that were also strung up. However, the planets behind him were no longer shrouded in mist, but the planets in front of him were still shrouded in mist, as if they were trying to block his vision. With a slight thought, Luo Fan sensed that his relationship with the Era Bridge seemed to be very different. Suddenly, he smiled faintly. He chanted the summoning incantation. In an instant, the surrounding mist dissipated and a youthful figure gradually appeared in front of him. This was the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge. Greetings, Master. After the treasure spirit appeared, it bowed to Luo Fan and greeted him. As expected, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization when he saw the treasure spirit's performance. He knew that his feeling was right. The Era Bridge had indeed been refined by him in the process of becoming a transcendent expert. At this moment, the 36 perfected realm magic treasures that formed this magic treasure had already merged into one and could no longer be separated. The imprints left by the connate Zenith Heaven cultivators that had refined these magic treasures at the perfected realm had also been completely erased. At this moment, only Luo Fan's imprint remained in this magic treasure. This magic treasure, which had originally surpassed the perfected realm, had undergone a lot of changes over the past few days. It was many times stronger than it had been in the past. It was as if Luo Fan had refined and strengthened it every time he passed a checkpoint on the transcendence path. Now, the aura that this magic treasure exuded was completely the aura of a transcendent expert. Obviously, this magic treasure was at the level of a transcendent expert. It was definitely equivalent to a transcendent expert. Moreover, because it was no longer limited by its body, the power it could exert was a level higher than that of a transcendent expert. Even if it had not reached the level of a Tao master, it was still not something that an ordinary transcendent expert could resist. Get up. Luo Fan raised his hand and beckoned. Get up. The treasure spirit of the Era Bridge naturally stood up straight and stood aside, waiting for Luo Fan's instructions. Luo Fan didn't stand on ceremony. He directly poured his mind into the treasure spirit and began to search its memories in the most meticulous way. He tried his best to search for everything that the treasure spirit had experienced in the past, as well as possible traces of the Almighty who had created the transcendence path. However, it was a pity that the treasure spirit's memories were extremely clear. From the moment it was born until now, there was not the slightest trace of anything strange, nor was there any trace of the existence of other powers. It was as if the existence of the Almighty was just Luo Fan's imagination. In fact, there was no such powerful existence at all. This was obviously impossible. Putting everything else aside, how could there be such a coincidence in this world? The 9,999 checkpoints of the Era Vortex just so happened to guide innate grand heavenly realm cultivators from the weakest to the strongest to the transcendent realm or to the great perfection quasi-saint realm. As for the results of his various tests years ago, he was even more convinced of the existence of the Almighty. Now that he had not found the Almighty, it was obviously impossible that the Almighty did not exist. It was just his imagination that could explain it. What else do you want to hide? Could it be that there's still something you can't let me know? Luo Fan frowned and murmured. He raised his head and looked at the fog that shrouded the 5 planets. His eyebrows gradually furrowed. The fog was faint, although it shrouded the 5 planets. it didn't obstruct one's vision at all. Therefore, Luo Fan could still see everything on the 5 planets with ease. The 5 planets looked very ordinary. They were no different from the planets that he had been to before. They were also barren and had a subtle connection with the vortex. Even though he was already a Transcendence Realm expert, he couldn't discover what was hidden in them. Unable to figure it out, Luo Fan locked onto the era vortex behind the 5 planets. He took a step forward and was about to move through the void to that location. Unfortunately, when he got out of the void state, he found that he was only 1 step away from where he was originally. It was as if the void shift from before had never happened, and he had just taken a normal step. I can't believe it still blocked me. I've refined the era bridge and become a Transcendence Realm expert. With the two combined, this Transcendence path is no longer of any use to me. Why can't I enter the era vortex? Luo Fan frowned and thought to himself. As he was thinking about this, the era vortex suddenly shook. Before Luo Fan could react, it suddenly expanded several times and directly swallowed the 5 planets in front of Luo Fan. Its edge appeared in front of Luo Fan, forcing Luo Fan to face the era vortex directly. Why is there such a sudden change? Is the era vortex about to collapse? Countless thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Although the era vortex had already swallowed them, the 5 planets still existed in Luo Fan's eyes. He was still being dragged by the era bridge to the end and enter the era vortex. Just like before, he could continue to go through the levels one by one. I wonder if I can still contact my main body after entering the era vortex. Forget it. I originally wanted to go as far as possible in the Transcendence Realm before coming back. Now that the situation has changed, I might as well transmit the comprehension of the Transcendence Realm back. Luo Fan thought to himself. With this thought in mind, with a single thought, countless pieces of information were transmitted to a certain void in the Earth's universe through an extremely mysterious connection. They were transmitted to a great thousand world that existed in that void. It was received by a young man sitting cross-legged. This young man was Luo Fan's main body, his main body in Earth's universe. He had been sitting cross-legged here for tens of millions of years, sorting out his new worldview. When Luo Fan's main body received the comprehension of the Transcendence Realm from his clone, his body shook. In an instant, his power, his body, his will, his senses, his mind, and his consciousness all started to improve endlessly. This kind of improvement, it was an improvement that completely surpassed common sense. Almost in an instant, his various abilities would improve by several times or even dozens of times. When this improvement was over, everything about him had improved by tens of millions of times compared to before. The extremely dense Transcendence aura completely filled the entire Great Thousand World. With the appearance of this aura, the entire Great Thousand World even started a subtle and inexplicable transition. The clone and the main body. They were originally one entity, and all the achievements of the clone. To the main body, it was all his achievements. Moreover, the 5 realms beyond innate Grand Luo were actually just different realms. As long as one could comprehend the profundities of each realm, one would naturally be able to obtain corresponding improvements. It was precisely because of this that when the clone's transcendence comprehension was transmitted to the main body, it would directly fuse with the main body's own comprehension, allowing the main body to directly comprehend the profundities of the Transcendence Realm. From there, his cultivation realm would directly advance to the Transcendence Realm, and he would become a transcendent like the clone. When the Transcendence aura on Luo Fan's main body completely stabilized, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. In his eyes, the entire world had completely changed. Unlike the clone, Luo Fan's main body did not pay attention to the profundities of the time tide at all. To him, the time tide was merely a special existence in the Earth's universe. Although it had unlimited power and endless magical uses, it was still limited to the Earth's universe. As long as it left the Earth's universe, it would not have any power at all. This kind of profundities that were limited to a perfect world were of no use to him. who was wholeheartedly pursuing the supreme, chaotic essence realm. What Luo Fan's main body paid attention to was the extremely mysterious and profound state of chaos that enveloped the Earth's universe. He turned his gaze and instantly saw through the entire Earth and the universe. He saw a stretch of gray and blurry existence that was like paste. That was the state of chaos, an incredible existence that could open up endless worlds with every drop. Unlike the state of chaos that he saw when he was in the Tao integration realm, the state of chaos that Luo Fan saw now was extremely vast. Moreover, what he saw was many times clearer than before. Things that he could only vaguely guess in the past were now clear at a glance. Things that he thought were true in the past were now filled with countless errors and omissions. The worldview that he had sorted out in the past was completely overturned at this moment. This was because the state of chaos that was derived from this worldview was vastly different from the state of chaos that Luo Fan was currently seeing. However, this worldview was quickly rebuilt at a speed that was even faster than when it was overturned. The accumulation of tens of millions of years completely erupted at this moment. Almost instantly, a worldview that Luo Fan absolutely agreed with appeared in his mind. This world, this boundless state of chaos, regardless of whether it is space, time, matter, or energy, they are all formed by the laws. The state before the state of chaos is the state of the laws. The state before the state of chaos is calm and without ripples. This calm and tranquil state suddenly became turbulent for some reason, and countless laws combined in different ways to form the boundless state of chaos. This state of chaos is then sorted out and formed the laws, and the great Tao. The laws, and the great Tao work together again to form time, space, matter, and energy, thus forming the complete world. In an instant, the evolution process from the state before the state of chaos to the perfect world directly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. In Luo Fan's mind, it was an extremely profound and mysterious existence. The meaning of its existence was just like the elementary particles that he had heard of on Earth in his previous life. Perhaps, in any culture, the word law did not have such a meaning. However, in Luo Fan's mind, it was an existence with such a meaning and such a characteristic. This was just like the meaning of the word Tao for ordinary cultivators. Back then, when the sage had not mentioned the ultimate meaning of cultivation, the word Tao did not have the meaning that almost all cultivators agreed with. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 991. When this worldview was established, all of Luo Fan's previous understandings of cultivation, all of his techniques, alchemy, and treasure refinement resurfaced from the depths of his memories. It reorganized itself in his mind at an unimaginable speed, replacing it with a brand new form based on this worldview. At first glance, this form did not seem to be much different from before. The method of achievement and the final result did not seem to have changed much. However, as long as one analyzed it carefully, they would find that it was completely different from before. It was a brand new technique, a brand new system, and a brand new technique. Even his Tao of Fruit of Wei had undergone an earth-shattering change at this moment. Originally, Luo Fan had already recombined his Tao of Fruit of Wei with the help of his understanding of the worldview in the past tens of millions of years. He had even changed the foundation of his cultivation in this universe into the Tao of Fruit of Wei. However, from the looks of it now, although his previous changes had made the Tao of Fruit of Wei 1,000 times more suitable for him than before, there was still a huge gap between it and his own will and his own understanding of the world. At this moment, after this worldview appeared, with a slight thought, the various parts of the Tao of Fruit of Wei that were incompatible with his understanding of the world instantly changed. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that his past cultivation was simply riddled with holes, and the flaws and omissions left behind were simply too many to the point that he felt ashamed just by looking at them. With a slight thought, all of his current cultivation was completely destroyed. His Daoyuo Dao fruit degenerated into a Tai Dao fruit. The Tai Dao fruit degenerated into an earthly immortal Dao fruit. The earthly immortal Dao fruit took another step back. It directly collapsed and dissipated, turning into countless three-dimensional talisman-like magic power that filled his body. In fact, even this magical power was degenerating at every moment. It degenerated back into the most basic form of energy and was expelled from his body like waste gas. When all of the changes were over, Luo Fan floated in the center of his vast 1,000 domains. His body also continued to weaken following the previous changes. Before he knew it, he had already weakened to the level of an ordinary person. No matter how one looked at it, he was already an ordinary person. But, under such circumstances, Luo Fan felt an indescribable sense of relaxation. He even felt as if he was truly his own self right now. At this moment, although Luo Fan no longer had any cultivation, this vast 1,000 world was still created by him. Therefore, he was like an ordinary person in everything he did. He could also do as he pleased in this place and change the world he wanted. Floating in the void was naturally an extremely simple thing to do. Luo Fan's body emitted a vast amount of yuan qi. The entire vast 1,000 domains had undergone earth-shattering changes due to the dissipation of the yuan qi in his body. A boundless ocean of liquefied energy covered the entire surface of the vast 1,000 worlds, raising the ground level of the entire vast 1,000 worlds by hundreds of miles. Apart from that, above the ocean of yuan qi, the endless yuan qi in the void condensed into all kinds of living beings, forming mysterious and wonderful groups. Even though these groups had just been born, they seemed to have lived in this vast 1,000 domains for countless years, turning the entire world into an extremely magnificent world. Luo Fan did not care about all of this. It was as if this change was not caused by the yuan qi in his body. He floated in the void and gradually closed his eyes. His mind and mind were focused on the great way of the way that he had created. The essence and blood in his body began to circulate from slow to fast as he thought about it. As the essence and blood circulated, strands of strange silk appeared in his body. These strange silk threads were extremely fine and short. If they were not condensed from the circulation of Luo Fan's essence and had an extremely close connection with his mind, perhaps he would not have been able to sense the existence of these silk threads. This was the crudest and most simple rule. However, even if it was crude and simple, it was still a far cry from the real law. This was the foundation of Luo Fan's worldview. In Luo Fan's opinion, it was the foundation of the universe, the foundation of the state of chaos, and the foundation of the state before the state of chaos. Its power was not something that any energy, such as essential qi, inner force, essential essence, or yuan qi could compare to. Even though Luo Fan had just circulated his essence and blood to produce these laws, it was enough for Luo Fan to possess power that was close to the 9th stage of the mortal realm. If he used the magic that he had specially created to match his worldview, he would probably be invincible below the immortal realm. When these laws were produced, Luo Fan could not help but smile. His movements did not stop at all. The essence and blood in his body continued to circulate, and more laws were produced in his body as his essence and blood were circulated. The vitality in the outside world did not need to be controlled by him. He did not even need to use his authority as the creator of the vast 1,000 domains. It naturally gathered in his body and constantly replenished his essence and blood. Although his essence and blood were constantly being consumed to produce laws, not only did they not suffer any losses, but they were also growing stronger with every passing moment. His body also continued to grow stronger as his essence and blood grew stronger. This new cultivation method that Luo Fan had modified was completely in line with Luo Fan's worldview. His cultivation speed was simply unimaginable. 2 hours later, the laws in Luo Fan's body had already grown to the point where they filled his meridians. Unless they were compressed, they would not be able to increase even a tiny bit. At that moment, with a single thought from Luo Fan, the countless crude and simple laws suddenly condensed and formed a slender thread that flowed directly into all of Luo Fan's meridians. This was also a law. However, it was slightly more detailed and complete than the previous laws. After this thread was produced, the vitality in the vast thousand domains surged into Luo Fan's body even more violently and at an even more astonishing speed, constantly replenishing the loss of his essence and blood due to the circulation of the laws. Similarly, the replenishment of this vitality far exceeded the consumption of his essence and blood. This allowed his essence and blood to grow even faster during the circulation process, causing the strength of his body to increase at an unimaginable speed. At that moment, the laws produced by the circulation of essence and blood were no longer the subtle ones at the beginning. Instead, they directly connected his entire meridians and were many times longer than before. Another 2 hours passed, and the number of laws in Luo Fan's body increased to 129,600. This filled up his meridians once again. He felt that he could only continue to compress them to be able to accommodate even more laws. At that moment, according to the cultivation method, Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and the 129,600 threads, or 129,600 laws, instantly condensed into a mysterious three-dimensional talisman. This three-dimensional talisman was unpredictable, and it seemed to look like whatever it was. If you looked at it, it was a mountain. If you looked at it, it was a mountain. If you looked at it, it was water. If you looked at it, it was a sword. If you looked at it, it was a sword. If you looked at it, it was shit. It could also be shit. This was no longer a law, but a higher-level existence formed by the laws, the magical power unit. This was the creation of the magical power unit. This meant that Luo Fan had directly broken through to the mortal realm from scratch. He had stepped onto the path of immortality. If he was an ordinary person, this would be equivalent to achieving immortality. Although he was currently very far away from attaining the earthly immortal realm of the earthly immortal fruit of Tao, he needed to accumulate a large number of magical power units to finally condense an earthly immortal fruit of Tao. But he had already surpassed the mortal realm. At this moment, with the strength of the magical power unit, Luo Fan's strength was at least comparable to the peak of the golden immortal realm among the itinerant immortals, genuine immortals and golden immortals. After the magical power unit was formed, the consumption of Luo Fan's blood essence suddenly increased by tens of thousands of times every time, and the speed at which the surrounding primordial qi naturally poured into his body also increased by tens of thousands of times. Similarly, there was still a lot left after replenishing the blood essence in his body, which could greatly improve the strength of his body. And now, every time he circulated the blood essence in his body, what was produced was no longer the laws, but the magical power unit. In the past, he needed to circulate the blood essence tens of thousands of times to accumulate enough laws to condense a magical power unit. But now, he only needed to circulate the blood essence once. One could well imagine how great the difference was. With such an unimaginable speed, in another 2 hours, Luo Fan's magical power unit had already reached 129,600, forming a magical power that connected his entire meridians. The moment this magical power connected his entire meridians, his entire body, all his blood essence, his spirit, his senses, his will, and his mind were all completely integrated into that magical power at this moment. In an instant, Luo Fan's figure could no longer be seen at his original position. What was left was only a magical power that outlined a human figure circulating in the void endlessly. The meridians of living beings were a system that covered every inch of flesh and blood in the entire body. This magical power spread throughout Luo Fan's entire meridians, and the appearance it formed was naturally a human figure. Although this magical power had no beginning or end, and the head and tail were connected to each other, it did not circulate in a rough manner. Instead, it circulated according to an extremely mysterious frequency. The circulation process naturally revealed an extremely mysterious charm. The vast thousand domains originally possessed endless energy. Even though Luo Fan had previously absorbed a huge amount of energy, it did not change the appearance of the vast thousand domains much. The entire vast thousand domains still looked the same as before. The bottom was covered by a boundless sea of liquefied yuan qi, and there were countless yuan qi species living in the void. At this moment, such a strange change occurred where Luo Fan was, and a mysterious charm naturally filled the entire vast thousand domains. It produced an indescribable summoning force that continuously summoned countless yuan qi species that were scattered all over the vast thousand domains. They gathered around Luo Fan, and it was unknown how many billions of them there were. However, although the number of these yuan qi creatures was astonishing, not a single one of them dared to come within 100,000 feet of Luo Fan. They floated in the void tens of thousands of feet away from where Luo Fan was, and all of them exuded a pious, fanatical, and childlike aura. These various auras were clearly directed towards the magical power that floated in the void. The magical power circulated in a cycle, revealing an extremely profound charm. At the same time, it was also Luo Fan who had transformed into that magical power. After circulating 129,600 times in the void, the magic power suddenly trembled and shrank at an extremely fast speed. In the end, it shrank into a mysterious ball that seemed to be constantly changing, and it was completely impossible to determine what it looked like. As soon as this object appeared, the entire vast thousand domains trembled violently. An indescribable wave swept across the entire vast thousand domains, causing the endless yuan qi creatures in the vast thousand domains to undergo an unimaginable baptism in an instant. This baptism caused the countless yuan qi living beings to instantly increase their cultivation by a level. Furthermore, during this process, their essence actually underwent some changes, some extremely inconceivable changes. They changed from yuan qi creatures to flesh and blood creatures. This kind of change was almost a change from illusion to reality, from false to real. That ball of magical power was condensed and formed. The magical power trembled in the void, and a figure replaced that mysterious ball of existence. That was the body of Luo Fan, and that mysterious ball of existence was none other than the earthly immortal fruit of Wei that he had condensed. But this time, the earthly immortal fruit of Wei directly transformed into the appearance of Luo Fan, and did not appear in his dantian like the previous earthly immortal fruit of Wei. It was as if the current Luo Fan was the earthly immortal fruit of Wei. The earthly immortal fruit of Wei was just like Luo Fan. This degree of fusion, it allowed Luo Fan's understanding of the earthly immortal fruit of Wei, as well as his control over the earthly immortal fruit of Wei, had far surpassed the past. The power of his magical power was also many times stronger than before. Although this body of his was formed from the earthly immortal fruit of Wei, it was no different from his normal body. It was not a body of energy, nor was it a projection, but a real body. In reality, it and the earthly immortal fruit of Wei were two sides of the same coin. Between the two, the essence was the same, but the manifestation was different. At this time, Luo Fan floated in the void, and his body had an incomparably mysterious charm. Every muscle on his body undulated, every strand of his hair fluttered, and every curve of his hair seemed to contain infinite mysteries, as if they were telling the world, the universe, and all living things about the mysteries of the laws. They were telling him about his view of the world, telling him about the world in his eyes, and telling him about the profound principles that were enough to allow him to achieve supreme transcendence. This is the true earthly immortal fruit of Wei that belongs to me. Luo Fan pondered for a while, and then let out a long sigh. At this moment, although the power of his magical power could move mountains and drain seas and destroy the world, it was still very weak in his eyes. However, in this weak magical power, He could feel the incomparable beauty that he could not feel in the earthly, immortal realm in the past. His previous earthly, immortal fruit of Wei, at that time, felt so powerful, so perfect, and so suitable for him. But compared to now, he found that there was an invisible barrier between him and the earthly, immortal fruit of Wei. This barrier prevented him from pushing the earthly, immortal fruit of Wei to the limit, and he could not enjoy the complete satisfaction of attaining the earthly, immortal fruit of Wei. After sensing his body slightly, he no longer hesitated. With a slight thought, he began to continue to cultivate the great way of the fruit of Wei that he had created according to his view of the world. Endless yuan qi constantly surged into his body as he cultivated, strengthening his blood essence, strengthening his body, and making up for the insignificant consumption of blood essence compared to his growth. As this process went on, his earthly immortal fruit of Wei also changed. The number of magical power units that made up the earthly immortal fruit of Wei increased, and the form of the earthly immortal fruit of Wei also became more and more complex and mysterious. And the magical power units that made up the magical power continued to change along with this process, becoming more and more detailed and perfect. At this moment, the earthly immortal fruit of Wei was Luo Fan's body, and Luo Fan's body was the earthly immortal fruit of Wei. The transformation of the earthly immortal Dao fruit naturally appeared on Luo Fan's body. It caused the lines on his body, the aura on his body, and every movement he made to become more and more profound. The profundities he displayed also became more and more profound. The endless yuan qi creatures that guarded the surroundings also changed along with the changes of Luo Fan's body. The aura of the yuan qi creatures became less and less, and the aura of the fleshly creatures became more and more. The changes in Luo Fan's body even affected the entire vast thousand domains, causing the vast thousand domains to undergo various extremely subtle changes. This kind of change could not be described in words, but after this change, the mysteries of the laws that Luo Fan had just created, the secrets of the brand new worldview, seemed to have gradually become the basic rules of the vast thousand domains. The basic laws of the world, in other words, were the legendary will of the heavens, which was also the legendary attribute of the world. From the perspective of the vast thousand domains, if the cultivators in the vast thousand domains agreed with the worldview of the laws and cultivated the cultivation methods created based on the worldview of the laws, regardless of whether they were exquisite or crude, they would be able to obtain great convenience, and the difficulty of cultivation would be greatly reduced. And if the cultivators in this world cultivated methods created based on other worldviews, even the most fundamental cultivation method of the golden core realm in this universe would be extremely difficult. It would be like going against the heavens, and it would be extremely difficult to succeed. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 992. As Luo Fan continued to cultivate, the yuan qi that was originally emitted from his body in the vast thousand domains began to gradually decrease. Even though the vast thousand domains was so vast and the yuan qi was so rich, under Luo Fan's earth-shattering absorption, it was impossible for there to be no reaction at all. The earthly immortal realm had 3 stages, and Luo Fan spent 2 hours to complete the breakthrough in each stage. After 6 hours, Luo Fan's body shook, and he once again turned into a mysterious earthly immortal Tao fruit that seemed to contain the infinite mysteries of the universe. The earthly immortal's Tao fruit floated in the void, and the infinite magical power units that made up the Tao fruit suddenly collapsed, forming a magical power that was billions of times stronger than it was at the beginning. In the void, the outline of a specific human figure appeared. The human figure that was outlined by this magical power was obviously a meridian system, but it was vivid and lifelike. It was clearly the figure of Luo Fan, and it was his appearance. After this magical power appeared, it began to undergo some kind of incredible leap. At first, it expanded millions of times. Then, it suddenly shrank at an extremely fast speed, becoming more complex and mysterious than the earthly immortal Tao fruit. The countless magical power units that made up the earthly immortal Tao fruit became more refined, more mysterious, and more perfect. The earthly immortal Tao fruit, exuded an incomparably pure Tai aura, and there was also a pure Yang aura seeping out from it. This was the Tai Tao fruit. In this universe, it was also called pure Yang. After the Tai Tao fruit was formed, with a slight shake, it once again transformed into the figure of Luo Fan. This figure, it was so mysterious, so profound, containing indescribable principles, containing the most profound and profound profundities. All the Yuan Qi living beings in the vast thousand domains that saw the figure of Luo Fan underwent some kind of unimaginable sublimation in an instant. The aura of flesh and blood increased greatly, while the aura of the Yuan Qi living beings rapidly decreased. Because of the changes in the past few hours, the bodies of these essence Qi living beings began to tremble. It already contained more than half of the flesh and blood life forms aura. It was as if more than half of the Yuan Qi life forms had transformed into flesh and blood life forms. After attaining the primordial unity Tao fruit, Luo Fan felt that the power of his divine ability was already comparable to the level of the original Daoyuo Tao fruit. The basic attributes of the entire vast thousand realms were now one step closer to the world of law. Without the slightest hesitation, Luo Fan closed his eyes again and continued to circulate the qi and blood in his body. More and more magical units were produced. They formed streams of magic power that constantly strengthened his primordial unity Tao fruit, allowing it to grow stronger and stronger. The speed at which the surrounding origin qi surged towards him was also increasing. The speed of the influx had already reached an earth-shattering level. Even the thick ocean of liquefied Yuan Qi beneath the great thousand world had started to shrink at a visible rate. Although the speed of decline was still very small, it was after all spread across the entire vast thousand world. There were so many of them that even though they only dropped a little bit in height each time, the total number was enough to make any primordial pure Yang cultivator explode. This time, it took Luo Fan 3 days. Only then did he cross the 3 realms of the primordial unity realm, scatter number, truth number, and gold number. He had reached the peak of the primordial unity gold number. At this time, although the power of his divine ability had not reached the level of the Daoyuo gold path, it was already not much weaker than the Daoyuo truth path cultivators. Luo Fan's own realm had already reached the terrifying level of the transcendent realm. His current cultivation was just readjusting the foundation of his past cultivation and changing the world of his cultivation that was compatible with his cultivation. In this way, the bottlenecks of the previous realms naturally did not exist for him at all. The moment when his cultivation reached the peak of the primordial unity gold number, his body suddenly shook. An incomparably perfect aura was emitted from his body in an instant. This perfect aura directly filled the entire vast thousand world, and even directly broke through the limits of the vast thousand world, directly descending into the outer universe of Earth, filling the cosmic void within a radius of dozens of light years. This was because at this moment, Luo Fan's body was the Tao fruit, and the Tao fruit was his body. The breakthrough of the fruit of Tao naturally caused his body to undergo the same changes. Everything about him had become incomparably complete, incomparably perfect. Although there were no changes to his appearance, it gave people the feeling that such a face was the true perfect face. Other faces that were different from this face, no matter how handsome, or beautiful they were not as perfect as his face. And although his body was not the most robust, it gave people the feeling that such a body was the body that a perfect living being should have. The slightly undulating muscles on his body, the way his hair fluttered, and his every movement were all filled with the aura of perfection. Any living being that saw Luo Fan at this moment would feel as if they were looking directly at the zenith heaven Tao fruit that he had just achieved. If they were willing to comprehend it, They could even comprehend the mysteries of the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit. In fact, if any living being could perfectly imprint Luo Fan at this moment in their mind, it would be equivalent to directly becoming a connate Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, although they would not be able to achieve the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, and the power of their abilities would be far inferior to that of a true Zenith Heaven Tao fruit cultivator, much less the current Luo Fan. They would still be at the supreme level of perfection. Following this change, in an instant, all the vitality living beings that were worshipping Luo Fan in this entire vast thousand world instantly shuddered. The aura that belonged to vitality living beings in their bodies completely disappeared. What replaced it was completely the aura of flesh and blood living beings. This aura caused these living beings to no longer be illusory. From now on, they were real, completely real living beings. In the instant that they became flesh and blood living beings, all the living beings let out a cry of ecstasy at the same time. These cries came in all kinds of strange sounds, but when mixed together, they instead seemed incomparably harmonious, secretly matching the charm of Luo Fan at this moment. Vitality, living beings, and flesh and blood living beings were both living beings. In essence, there was not much difference. There was no saying that vitality living beings were inferior to flesh and blood living beings. However, compared to flesh and blood living beings, vitality living beings had a weakness. That was, their essence was formless vitality. Because they were essentially formless vital energy, the form they revealed was just a simple form. This simple form made it impossible for them to pass on their own form, unable to maintain the independence of their race, and thus caused them to be completely forgotten one day. But flesh and blood living beings were different. Flesh and blood living beings were corporeal living beings. Their body form was a true and fixed form. This form could be passed on, allowing their descendants to maintain their form, so that their image could never be forgotten and could be passed on forever. For beings that could not be immortal, it was a different kind of eternity. Although the many essence chi living beings were definitely unable to explain the many principles mentioned above, they were still able to understand it. But when this change appeared, they instinctively felt happy, instinctively wanted to express their joy. This was why the vast thousand domains had changed at this moment, and the basic attributes of the vast thousand domains, following the changes of Luo Fan. Naturally, there was also a huge change. That worldview was even more deeply engraved into the basic rules of the world, causing the basic attributes to lean more and more towards the worldview of the law, towards the worldview of Luo Fan. These changes in the outside world were nothing to Luo Fan. At this moment, what he was concerned about was his cultivation. It was just the changes in his body. After recultivating, the current level of strength of his body was already comparable to the level when he became an exterminator. It was already comparable to the level when he had become an exterminator. And the power of his divine ability had already reached the level of the Daluo Golden Path. Although it was still a little weaker than the exterminator, it was not that far off. When he had completely stabilized his Daluo Dao fruit realm, he continued to circulate the chi and blood in his body. This time, it still produced magic power units one after another, and the speed at which the surrounding vitality surged in was tens of thousands of times faster than before. The speed at which the liquefied vitality ocean was descending was also tens of thousands of times faster than before. Although it was still insignificant, it was still countless times faster. This time, he spent 9 days and 9 nights to complete the 3 supreme realms of the Daluo Loose Path, the Daluo True Path, and the Daluo Golden Path. He directly raised his cultivation realm to the peak of the Daluo Golden Path. This realm had already reached the peak of the Dao Fruit realm that he had created in the past, apart from the origin Dao Fruit realm. But clearly, after Luo Fan found out about the cultivation realms of the Great Heaven Primordial World, he obviously could not treat the Daluo Golden Path as the only realm. Between the peak of the Daluo Golden Path and the Saint Realm, he had included the annihilation void enlightenment, Tao integration, transcendent, and Tao sovereign realms. As mentioned before, the Daluo realm was a realm that spanned almost limitless. The gap between the beginner Daluo and the peak of the Daluo realm might be so huge that even numbers could not describe it. At this moment, adding another 5 realms only made the division of the Daluo realm more precise, but did not completely overturn the original division of realms. When Luo Fan raised his cultivation realm to the peak of the Daluo Golden Path, because there was no longer a bottleneck, annihilation aura immediately appeared on his body. He directly broke through the peak of the Daluo Golden Path and became an exterminator. As soon as this annihilation aura appeared, the entire colossal world suddenly shook. Suddenly, there was no longer a need for Luo Fan to create it himself, and it naturally began to expand. The vitality that existed within it was constantly being born out of thin air, and the speed of its birth was so fast that it caused the liquefied vitality ocean that covered the entire colossal world to gradually rise. The colossal world expanded extremely quickly, and in just a few dozen breaths, it had already expanded to twice its original size. It even vaguely seemed to have the aura of surpassing the colossal world and becoming a higher world. However, this was only a trace of aura, and it was still extremely far away from truly surpassing the colossal world. As the aura on his body changed, Luo Fan's figure also changed along with it. At this moment, what existed on his body was still the Daluo Dao fruit, and it did not become something like the Annihilation Dao fruit just because he was an exterminator. However, compared to the original Daluo Dao fruit, after he became an exterminator, he suddenly underwent some sort of sublimation change. Its power, its strength, its profoundness, and its complexity had all increased by countless times compared to before. Even though it was still a Zenith Heaven Dao fruit, it was on a completely different level from before. After completing this transformation, Luo Fan had no intention of stopping. Instead, he continued to circulate the qi and blood in his body. However, it was no longer the magical power units from before, but streaks of magical power. In other words, every time he circulated his qi and blood, the number of magical power units produced would be as many as 129,600. Moreover, every unit of magical power was more complicated and mysterious than before. The laws contained within them were even more exquisite and complete. As a result, the speed at which the surrounding vital qi gushed and increased by hundreds of thousands of times. 10 days later, when Luo Fan broke through to the Annihilation Realm and became a void-comprehending realm, the entire Great Thousand Worlds Yuan Qi Ocean would be filled with a sea of energy. It was completely dried up. Even though the entire Great Thousand Worlds Yuan Qi doubled again, it no longer looked much different from a normal world. At this time, the many living beings that had been transformed from vital qi into flesh and blood could no longer obtain any benefits from Luo Fan's transformation. At this time, the profoundness contained in Luo Fan's transformation had already far exceeded what they could accept. It had already far exceeded their range of acceptance, to the point where they instinctively didn't dare to look at it. Under such circumstances, the area within several million miles of where Luo Fan was emptied. It was not that they had lost their reverence for him, but that they instinctively knew that if they remained here, they would not be able to withstand the pressure of the transformation and would lose their lives. Moreover, after they had become living beings, they had also lost the characteristic of not needing to eat. They could endure it for a few days, but they could not endure it for more than 10 days. As a result, they dispersed one by one to search for food. However, even if they had dispersed, they would still look in Luo Fan's direction with reverence and admiration whenever they were free. The liquefied Yuan Qi in the Great Thousand World had dried up, but that did not mean that Luo Fan's cultivation speed had slowed down. After attaining the golden immortal Dao fruit, Luo Fan had long since been able to attain self-sufficiency, and the energy within his body was completely capable of being born out of thin air. It could be said that at that time, he didn't need to absorb the energy of the outside world when he cultivated. The reason why he had been absorbing the yuan qi was simple. It was because there was too much yuan qi, so much that the amount of yuan qi he absorbed from the outside world was several times more than the yuan qi that was naturally produced in his body. In this way, it was obvious that absorbing the yuan qi from the outside world would be faster and more convenient for him to cultivate. That was why the liquefied yuan qi ocean had dried up. After the liquefied yuan qi in the outside world dried up, the density of the yuan qi in the Great Thousand World was naturally thinner than before. However, it was still extremely dense. At this moment, the surface area of the Great Thousand World was already 4 times larger than before. The density of the yuan qi had also reached about 40 times larger than before. These two were not related by cause and effect. Instead, they were the results of a juxtaposition. This was because this vast thousand domains already had its own unique attributes and was already in line with a unique and natural worldview. Therefore, the origin had become incomparably rich, which led to the fact that the surface area had increased and the vitality had become denser. Luo Fan still did not care about these changes. He was still wholeheartedly cultivating. Because he had lost the supplement of the yuan qi from the outside world, he had to rely on the yuan qi produced by the Tao fruit in his body to improve. Therefore, the speed of his improvement was much slower than before. A year later, Luo Fan broke through the void enlightening realm and became a Tao integration cultivator. The moment he broke through, changes that were almost similar to before appeared again. His figure directly revealed the mysteries of Tao integration, and the Great Thousand World doubled in size again, reaching more than 8 times its original size. The yuan qi also became much denser, and some places directly formed a yuan qi mist that lingered, making the Great Thousand World seem like a legendary fairyland. Next, 10 years later, the entire Great Thousand World shook again and more than doubled in size. The yuan qi mist in the entire Great Thousand World became even denser, and the area it covered became even wider. Luo Fan's figure hovered in the center of the Great Thousand World, exuding an indescribable, transcendent aura. It was as if his figure, every muscle on his body, every breath he took, and every movement of his eyes seemed to be developing the endless mysteries of transcendent. This was because Luo Fan had finally cultivated his cultivation realm from nothing to the realm he had before he recultivated and became a transcendent cultivator again. Back then, Luo Fan had started from zero and spent trillions of years crossing 2 perfect worlds and a large world. He had also created several clones and used up an endless amount of energy. He did not dare to relax at all, and only then did he barely step into the transcendent realm and become a transcendent cultivator. At this moment, he had recultivated from an ordinary person to the transcendent realm. From the beginning to the end, it had taken him less than 12 years. Moreover, after he finally completed his cultivation, the power of his magic power, the toughness of his body, and so on were all many times stronger than before. At this moment, he could even easily crush his previous self in a powder with just his physical body alone. Chapter 993. After becoming a transcendent being again, Luo Fan's cultivation realm had reached its peak state before he recultivated. However, this was still not Luo Fan's peak state. He could still continue cultivating, and he could clearly feel that he had a lot of room for improvement. From now on, it was time for him to really start cultivating. The previous 10 years of cultivation were just to consolidate his foundation, and it was not real cultivation. In the tens of millions of years before that, he had been completely sorting out his worldview. Although it was also extremely important, it was not real cultivation. The reason why his cultivation realm was able to improve continuously during the tens of millions of years he spent sorting out his worldview was because his clone was creating the path of transcendence, and the benefits he obtained from the path of transcendence were constantly being transmitted back to him. Obviously, his own cultivation realm could not completely rely on the clone on the transcendence path. The best way for him to improve his cultivation level was to rely on his own cultivation to improve bit by bit. Of course, he did not forget that there was still an important thing that he needed to do before continuing to cultivate. That was the most fundamental purpose of his coming to this Earth universe, which was to provide the answers that he needed for the cultivation of his main body in the primordial world. As he thought about it, he slowly closed his eyes. He sent his worldview, his comprehension of the transcendent realm, and all his memories through an extremely mysterious spiritual connection to a place where even he didn't know where his main body was. The primordial world. Since the last time his main body had contacted the Earth universe, 10 Yuan Hui had passed in the primordial world. In other words, it had been 1,296,000 years. Similar to his clone in the Earth universe, his main body had been sorting out his worldview all these years. He wanted to find a worldview that was the most suitable for him. It was a worldview that was based on the boundless primal chaos of this universe and the state before the primal chaos of this universe. However, what was different from his clone in the universe on Earth was that his progress over the years was rather slow. On the other hand, his cultivation realm was still at the third stage of the Zenith Heaven realm. He was still at the peak of the Zenith Heaven realm, and he hadn't even broken through to the Zenith Heaven realm, achieving the Zenith Heaven Golden Tao. On this day, Luo Fan was standing in front of the space-time portal with his eyes closed, sorting out his view of the world. Suddenly, a spiritual connection that he had been looking forward to connected with his soul. He was incomparably familiar with this spiritual connection. It was incomparably intimate. It was a spiritual connection extended from his clone. The moment he sensed this spiritual connection, an endless amount of information flowed into his mind through this spiritual connection. He did not even need to absorb it before it was completely integrated into the depths of his memories. This information was the memories of his clone. Similarly, it was naturally his own memories. He transferred his memories to himself. There was no need for any absorption process. Naturally, it was directly integrated into his memory. Reading these memories, Luo Fan's face showed a look of enlightenment. So that's how it is. After a long time, Luo Fan let out a long breath. He opened his eyes. At first glance, the world in his eyes did not seem to have changed at all. However, upon closer inspection, it was completely different from before. It was as if the world had changed. The worldview transmitted by his clone seemed to have directly described his understanding of the world in the most accurate and perfect way. Seeing this worldview, the results of his previous million years of hard work were completely overturned. Even the many inheritances and worldviews that his avatar had obtained in the great Tianyuan world were instantly thrown to the back of his mind. This is my worldview. This is the true face of the world. An indescribable sense of confidence and enlightenment filled his mind. This was a kind of enlightenment that came from touching the great Tao at a close distance. This was the confidence that he had finally completely awakened. After understanding this worldview, Luo Fan naturally did not need to pay attention to other things. In an instant, the cultivation in his body began to continuously regress, just like his clone in the Earth universe. The Daoyuo Dao fruit degenerated into a Tai Dao fruit. The Tai Dao fruit degenerated into an earthly immortal Dao fruit. The earthly immortal Dao fruit degenerated into magic power. The magic power turned into magic power units. And finally, it turned back into vitality. However, the vitality in his body did not directly dissipate into the world he was in like his clone in the Earth universe. Instead, it completely poured into the Wuji Void Palace that was integrated into his body. This directly made the nearly millions of worlds feel their origin strengthening at almost the same time. The vitality of each world also became much denser as the vitality poured in. Meanwhile, Luo Fan's body, spirit, sea of consciousness, will perception, and everything else had completely become at the level of an ordinary person. Of course, although the level was the same, he was born with a Taoism aptitude. After all, he had once been powerful. His body and everything else were still much stronger than ordinary people. After that, he naturally cultivated the brand new Tao fruit that he had created based on the worldview, just like his main body in the Earth universe. His qi and blood constantly surged and circulated. The vitality produced within the Wuji Void Palace surged in, and his cultivation realm began to improve step by step. The first stage of the mortal realm, the second stage, the third stage, the fourth stage, the ninth stage. After the ninth stage, the magic power unit was formed. After cultivating again, his body finally gave birth to the first magic power, and it once again condensed into the earthly, immortal Tao fruit. In just a few hours, he started from zero and obtained the earthly, immortal Tao fruit again. After the earthly, immortal Tao fruit, he completed the cultivation of the earthly, immortal Tao fruit a day later and obtained the Tai Tao fruit. 10 days later, the Daluo Tao fruit appeared, and he once again achieved the Daluo Loose Tao. After achieving the Daluo Loose Tao, his cultivation did not slow down at all. After spending a year, he broke through his original limit and reached the peak of the Daluo Golden Tao. After that, in another 10 years, his cultivation level had increased by leaps and bounds. He directly reached the limit of the cultivation realm that his clone in the Earth universe had transmitted over, and finally entered the transcendent realm, becoming a transcendent being. In just a short span of 10 years, his cultivation level had increased by hundreds of millions of times compared to before. At this moment, the entire untainted land appeared in his mind. The untainted land, which had seemed incomparably huge to him, no longer seemed so vast. A feeling of being restricted arose spontaneously. The transcendent realm. So it's not just the transcendence of cultivation, but also the transcendence of mentality. At this moment, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization and discovered the deeper meaning of the transcendent realm. After reaching the transcendent realm, even a perfect world like the untainted world would become a world without many secrets. For such a world, it was naturally not a problem to stay for a period of time. However, if he stayed for a little longer, it would be something unbearable. Therefore, once he reached the transcendent realm, the mentality of a cultivator would naturally change. The kind that sought to truly transcend the perfect world and obtain true immortality. The desire that could not be tempered by thousands of tribulations would naturally strengthen along with it. This was the deeper mystery of the transcendent realm. Perhaps the growth of the untainted world into a major world will change this situation. Luo Fan thought to himself. However, his gaze was cast outside the primordial world, which was surging endlessly. It was a chaotic state with endless mysteries. Because of his cultivation over the past 10 years, the small world he was in had unknowingly obtained an incredible improvement because of the various mysteries emitted from his cultivation. A world that was originally extremely far away from the major kiliocosm had now become an extremely powerful major kiliocosm. It was even like the major kiliocosm where Luo Fan's clone of the Earth universe was located. There was a hint of a charm that surpassed the major kiliocosm. Luo Fan floated between this major kiliocosm and sensed that it had been completely influenced by the worldview of law and had been completely separated from the untainted world. He inexplicably had a kind of enlightenment in his heart. If I can attain the primordial chaos Tao fruit here, then this major kiliocosm should be able to break away from the untainted world and become a perfect world of the same level as the untainted world. Even if it is not as vast as the untainted world, it can still exist in the chaotic state for a long time. As soon as this enlightenment appeared, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. Although this enlightenment was a new kind of enlightenment that allowed him to have some new understanding of the power of the primordial chaos realm, it was of no help to him whether he could attain the primordial chaos Tao fruit and reach the primordial chaos realm. If he had attained the primordial chaos Tao fruit, he would be a perfect world. The chaotic state itself would no longer cause him any harm. Why would he need to transform a major kiliocosm into a perfect world to bear his existence? Of course, this did not mean that such a characteristic was useless. Although it could not help Luo Fan's cultivation, the major kiliocosm had already completely engraved the worldview of law on its basic laws. Through the study and understanding of the operation of this major kiliocosm, he could deduce many aspects of the worldview of law. Of course, this was not an insignificant matter. After thinking for a while, Luo Fan put this behind him. Now, it was more important for him to cultivate and continuously improve his cultivation realm. Just like his clone in the Earth universe, after becoming a transcendent, he still did not feel that he had reached his limit. He still felt that he still had a chance to improve. Taking advantage of the spirit of cultivating from zero to the transcendent realm in a short period of 10 years, he had to seize the time to continue cultivating. He hoped that his cultivation realm could make greater progress. It was naturally impossible to directly break through the transcendent realm and become a Tao master. However, it was not impossible to achieve the complete transcendent realm. After all, this Tao fruit based on the worldview of law was completely created according to Luo Fan's own concept. In the untainted world, the Earth universe, the great Tianyuan world, and even the billions of perfect worlds in the boundless chaotic state, there was absolutely no one more suitable for this new Tao fruit than him. As a result, it was clear that the difficulty of him cultivating this new Tao was the lowest among all living beings, and it was also the lowest among all the methods he could cultivate. Under such circumstances, improving in the same realm, it was not a difficult thing for him. To him, raising his cultivation realm to the complete transcendent realm was just a matter of time. It was only a matter of time. The possibility of being stuck in the middle was almost impossible. However, similar to his clone in the Earth universe, he had another thing to do before entering the cultivation realm. That was to share the benefits he had obtained with his clone in the great Tianyuan world. Of course, this was not because he was ambitious and wanted to achieve supreme achievements in the three perfect worlds or the great worlds. To achieve the supreme saint realm, it was because there was a path to become a saint in the great Tianyuan world. The nature of this path to become a saint was similar to the transcendent path that Luo Fan's clone in the Earth universe had gone through. If his clone in the great Tianyuan world could go through that path to become a saint, then perhaps his body could also achieve a supreme breakthrough, directly attaining the mixed essence Tao fruit. The success of this plan might be illusory, but no matter how illusory it was still an opportunity. No cultivator would give up a chance to become a saint, no matter how illusory it was. That was why he did not forget his clone in the great Tianyuan world even at this moment. He was not willing to give it up. Luo Fan closed his eyes and slowly touched a kind of incomparably mysterious spiritual connection that even the chaotic state couldn't block. All of his memories and all of his comprehensions were connected. He sent all of his memories and comprehensions through this mysterious spiritual connection to another world that was countless miles away from the primordial world. It was an extremely vast world, in the depths of his clone's soul. After sending all of his memories and comprehensions, Luo Fan did not waste any more time. He directly closed his eyes in the void and began to circulate his qi and blood to cultivate. In the Earth universe that was countless miles away from the primordial world, in the boundless starry sky of the universe, there was a place of nothingness. There was an extremely vast, major kiliacosm hidden behind the void. This major kiliacosm was boundlessly vast, and it exuded an aura that was incompatible with the Earth universe. It was as if this major kiliacosm was another perfect world that came from the chaotic state and was accidentally embedded in the Earth universe. The entire major kiliacosm was inhabited by countless living beings. The appearance and living habits of these living beings were all different from all the living beings in the Earth universe. Even if one could find a few extremely similar living beings, they would definitely be able to find the differences. This could no longer be simply called a major kiliacosm in the Earth universe. This place should be called the Law Realm, a world of laws, a world that was constructed with a law worldview, a world that completely belonged to a cultivator. This world was, of course, the major kiliacosm that had all sorts of incredible improvements because of Luo Fan's cultivation in it. Luo Fan was floating cross-legged on a mountain that was neither too tall nor too short in this major kiliacosm. The shape of his body directly revealed the mysteries of the transcendent realm. Any living being that could withstand it would be able to comprehend the secrets of the transcendent realm just by looking at his body. Even a path integration cultivator could eventually achieve a breakthrough and become a transcendent realm cultivator through this comprehension. At this moment, Luo Fan's eyes were closed, and the qi and blood in his body were circulating at a very mysterious speed and frequency. Wisps of Dharma power were constantly produced along with the circulation of his qi and blood. During this process, an endless amount of primordial qi was produced out of thin air in various parts of his body. Not only did it replenish the loss caused by the circulation of Dharma power, but it also strengthened his qi and blood. As a result, his body, his spirit, his perception, his willpower, and everything else were constantly strengthened. His body was the Tao fruit, and the Tao fruit was his body. This Tao fruit was self-sufficient and could produce enough primordial qi on its own, which was equivalent to his body constantly producing primordial qi out of thin air. Now, it had been as long as 100,000 years since he had transmitted his memories and his comprehension to his main body in the primordial world. During these 100,000 years, as he cultivated, his cultivation realm had been improving almost every moment. At this moment, his cultivation realm had already reached the greater success of the transcendent realm. He was only a tiny bit away from the perfected transcendent realm. In fact, this bit had already existed 30,000 years ago. Over the past 30,000 years, he had felt that he could completely overcome this tiny bit of gap in the next moment and completely step into the perfected transcendent realm. However, after 30,000 years, this tiny bit of gap still shackled him, causing his cultivation realm to be limited to the greater success of the transcendent realm and not the perfected transcendent realm. Faced with this situation, although Luo Fan had experienced over a decade and achieved breakthroughs that took trillions of years, he did not feel annoyed or discouraged because of this huge difference. After all, his Taoist heart was perfected and tough. In the past, his cultivation realm had been shackled for billions of years without being able to break through, but he had never felt annoyed because of this, let alone now that he could not break through for only 30,000 years. To him, being able to raise his cultivation realm from the initial transcendent realm to the peak of the greater success of the transcendence realm and was about to reach the perfected transcendent realm in just 100,000 years was already an unimaginably fast speed. In comparison, being unable to improve for tens of thousands of years was more like a normal speed. Perhaps it was because of this mentality that the entire law realm he was in shook one day 100,000 years after he had transmitted his memories and senses back to the primordial world. Although it did not immediately expand, it was naturally filled with a sense of joy. Chapter 994. After spending 100,000 years, Luo Fan had finally broken through several small realms from the initial transcendent realm and finally reached the transcendent realm, complete realm. This kind of progress was unimaginably fast. If news of this were spread, all cultivators would be so envious that their eyes would turn red and their hearts would be twisted with jealousy. After all, ordinary cultivators in the transcendent realm, or the pinnacle quasi-sage realm, would require tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of years of accumulation before they could succeed in increasing their cultivation by a small realm. Luo Fan, an existence who had just entered the transcendent realm, was actually so relaxed. In just a short span of 100,000 years, he had crossed several realms and directly reached the transcendent realm great perfection. How could they not be jealous and envious? Above the transcendent realm was the Tao Master realm, where one would become a Tao Master. Above the Tao Master realm was the Sage realm, where one would obtain the mixed Yuan Tao fruit and become a sage. The transcendent realm, complete realm, was only one step away from the Tao Master realm. If it was possible, no one would know when they would be able to cross this step. From this, it could be seen how hard it was to reach the transcendent realm, complete realm, and how profound it was. Luo Fan floated in the center of this realm. The entire realm seemed to expand and contract as he breathed. It seemed to be constantly changing along with the circulation of his chi and blood. A mysterious charm resonated with him and evolved the infinite mysteries of the world of laws. 100,000 years was enough for this realm to develop. At this moment, there were already hundreds of intelligent species in this realm. They formed countless intelligent creatures. Even the peerless existences among these intelligent creatures had comprehended thousands of cultivation methods based on Luo Fan's undisguised body form, forming an incomparably prosperous cultivation civilization in this realm. This was because the Tao fruit path that Luo Fan cultivated was created based on the world of laws. The mysteries contained in his body form were naturally based on the world of laws. That was why the thousands of cultivation methods comprehended by the peerless figures of the various intelligent races were all based on the worldview of the laws, even though they were of varying degrees of subtlety. Perhaps they started from different perspectives and ended up with different results, but they were the staunchest supporters of the world of law. In fact, there were even many living beings with peerless intelligence who had summarized the parts of this worldview related to the world. Since there were intelligent creatures, naturally, they would have some guesses about the origin of this world. Hence, there was a legend about the creation of the world in the law realm. Legend has it that a primordial spirit was born from the primordial chaos before the world was created. At a certain moment, the origin spirit felt that the surrounding chaos was too monotonous, so it opened its hand and tore. It tore the chaos apart. The foundation of heaven and earth was created by it. According to the will of the origin spirit, this colorful world of laws was constructed. According to the legends, it was located in the center of the entire world, a place where no living being could approach and could only watch from afar. That was where the origin spirit lived, and all the undying creatures that entered this area could see the tall figure that contained endless mysteries, which was the projection of the origin spirit. Obviously, the legendary Genesis spirit was referring to Luo Fan. These legends were far from the truth, but at least it represented their agreement with the world of law. As for why those living beings could not approach the area where Luo Fan was, there was no other reason. It was because the form of Luo Fan's body naturally contained the mysteries of transcendence. If living beings without the heart of transcendence got close, they would feel unbearable pain. If they did not leave, they might even be crushed to death by the pressure of this mystery. Even living beings with the heart of transcendence could only linger on the edge because the gap between them and Luo Fan was too great. They could only vaguely sense the aura that Luo Fan's body naturally emitted and vaguely receive the mysteries of transcendence that his body emitted. Luo Fan moved his mind slightly, and everything in the entire law realm was included in his mind. It's actually grown to this point. Luo Fan sighed, but he could sense the height that the cultivation world of the law realm had grown to. The cultivation system that the entire law realm had formed over the past 100,000 years was a cultivation system known as the nomological cultivation system. This cultivation system started from one's chi and blood. By continuously tempering one's chi and blood, one would condense one's body until it reached a certain level, allowing one's body to break through its limits and come into contact with certain rules or nomological laws. Then, through continuous cultivation, one's contact with the rules or nomological laws would deepen and finally reach a level where one could control certain rules or nomological laws. From then on, one's control of the rules or nomological laws would be the starting point. They would constantly expand and delve deeper into the essence of the rules or nomological laws. Their ultimate goal was to comprehend the fundamental laws of heaven and earth and obtain supreme power and transcendence. The process of condensing one's body was the cultivation of the first 8 stages of the mortal realm. When one's body broke through its limits and came into contact with certain rules or nomological laws, that was the cultivation of the 9th stage of the mortal realm. Then, through continuous contact and deep understanding, one would finally be able to control a trace of the rules or nomological laws. That was the level of breaking through the 9th stage of the mortal realm and reaching the first stage of the immortal realm. Just like that, when one finally came into contact with the nomological laws, one would break through the ninth stage of the immortal realm, but not enter the perishing realm. At this moment, apart from the creators of the cultivation system that could cultivate to the seventh stage of the immortal realm, no one in the entire law realm could cultivate to the fourth stage of the immortal realm or above. Apart from those living beings, the strongest cultivators were only at the third stage of the immortal realm. Sensing the development of the entire law realm's cultivation civilization, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable emotion. Back then, he had cultivated from nothing to the seventh stage of the immortal realm, which was equivalent to the seventh stage of the immortal realm. He had crossed two perfect worlds and spent billions or trillions of years to barely succeed. Now, because of his existence, the living beings in the law realm had only spent a short 100,000 years to reach the seventh stage of the immortal realm. They had actually reached the seventh stage of the immortal realm. Furthermore, they had a clear understanding of the cultivation system. Surpassing the ninth stage of the immortal realm was only a matter of a few 100,000 years. How could he not be emotional? Others envied Luo Fan for being able to cultivate from an initial stage of the transcendent realm to the perfected stage of the transcendent realm in a short 100,000 years. However, Luo Fan was envious of the living beings in the law realm for being able to cultivate to the seventh stage of the immortal realm in a short 100,000 years. The affairs of the world were truly unpredictable. It made one feel emotional. I'll just let them develop. I wonder when they'll discover the truth of the law realm. Luo Fan suddenly had such a thought. Every single one of the living beings who had created this cultivation system of the law realm was shockingly intelligent, and their cultivation aptitude was top-notch. Although the law realm was vast and boundless, it was definitely not enough to satisfy them. However, it was absolutely impossible for them to be satisfied. This could be seen from the fact that they were able to step into Luo Fan's area and comprehend the cultivation method from there. Being able to do this meant that they had the transcendent heart. What did the transcendent heart transcend? Of course, the law realm was one of them. It brought them endless benefits, but it also restricted them at the same time. Therefore, when they had the strength, they would definitely want to transcend the law realm. He thought to himself. With a thought, Luo Fan's illusory figure remained in place. He took a step forward and directly left the law realm, arriving on Earth's universe in the outside world. The illusory figure he left behind was a complete copy of his figure. It also contained the mysteries of the transcendent realm and had the same effect as his original body. It could prevent all living beings without the transcendent heart from entering the region where he was. It could also allow living beings with the transcendent heart to comprehend some of the mysteries of the transcendent realm. It could be said that the existence of this illusory figure had replaced all of Luo Fan's functions. It did not change the mysteries of the law realm. The law realm is now completely different from before. It's not very appropriate to leave it here. Luo Fan thought to himself. In the blink of an eye, his perception covered the void within a radius of 1 billion light years. Within this radius of 1 billion light years, there were tens of millions of galaxies. The number of stars and planets among them was unimaginable. After becoming a transcendent, Luo Fan could see the entire perfect world clearly. He could even break through the limitations of the perfect world and see the chaotic state of the outside world. To him, covering a radius of 1 billion light years with his perception was a trivial matter. If he wanted to, even if the area was 10 times or 100 times larger, he could easily cover it with his perception. The reason why his perception was limited to a radius of 1 billion light years was simple. Apart from the fact that it was already sufficient, he could also faintly sense that there were several auras that were not any weaker than his own 1 billion light years away. Although those auras did not originate from Earth's universe, they originated from a world that had been established. However, their auras were too terrifying. Even the space-time barrier could not completely block them, which was why Luo Fan could sense them. They should be remnants from the era of the sages. After experiencing the magnificent era of the sages and cultivating for more than 10 billion years, it's not impossible for them to become great completion quasi-sages. When Luo Fan sensed those auras, he was first shocked. Then, he came to a sudden realization and thought of the reason for their existence. The era of the sages was the second era before the age of chaos. This era was named after the sages. Therefore, the trend that would eventually destroy this era would naturally target the sages. For cultivators who were not sages, although it would affect them, it was not impossible for them to avoid the disaster. After the era of the sages came the era of cultivation. This was an era without sages, but it was extremely suitable for cultivators to cultivate. In such an era, the cultivators who survived from the era of the sages would naturally improve extremely quickly. Originally, they would need billions or trillions of years to achieve their cultivation, but in a short period of 6 billion years, they would eventually reach an unimaginable realm. The Great Completion quasi-sage realm was obviously not something to be surprised about. Although the trend that destroyed the era of cultivation targeted cultivators, there was still a limit to it. If these cultivators were strong enough, they could still delay their destruction by hundreds of millions of years. Great Completion quasi-sage realm was obviously strong enough. At this moment, although it was already the age of chaos, it was only the beginning of tens of millions of years. Compared to the entire age of chaos that lasted for 6 billion years, this amount of time was nothing. Of course, it was only the beginning. At the same time, Luo Fan sensed those auras. It was impossible for the owner of those auras not to sense Luo Fan. However, it was unknown why. Although the owner of those auras sensed Luo Fan's unscrupulous actions, they all ignored him. It was as if Luo Fan did not exist, as if they did not care about Luo Fan at all. The auras did not move at all. If it was not for the fact that Luo Fan was extremely confident in his senses, he might have thought that his senses were wrong. Although thoughts kept flashing in his mind, Luo Fan did not hesitate in the slightest. He casually made a grabbing motion. His senses covered an area of 1 billion light years. Among the countless galaxies, trillions of stars, and trillions of planets, countless planets and stars, countless planets and stars instantly collapsed. The impact of the collapse of these planets and stars affected the entire universe, causing a strange vibration. It was as if the entire universe was about to collapse. Bastard! Junior, what are you doing? Are you trying to destroy the entire universe? At this moment, one of the auras that were disdainful of Luo Fan suddenly exploded. That aura rushed out from a world that overlapped with nothingness. In an instant, it covered an area of 10 billion light years and violently collided with Luo Fan's senses. Along with the collision, such a sentence was heard. The voice was old, hoarse, and had a sense of decay. It was as if it was coming from a ghost that had been dead for trillions of years. That voice was mixed with an unparalleled power. As he was engulfed by this voice, Luo Fan instantly felt as if he had fallen into a world completely composed of sound waves. It was not just his sense of hearing that voice. It was also his sense of sight, his sense of touch and smell. His sense of taste could also feel this voice. Regardless of whether it was a sense of sight, touch, smell, or taste, he could clearly sense the content of this voice and how furious it was. This was the strength of a peak great accomplishment quasi-sage realm cultivator. Even if it was just an ordinary sentence, it possessed absolute power. It could force any living being, no matter how flawed, to understand what he was saying. Haha, this Taoist has achieved the Tao first. Logically speaking, you do have the right to call me a junior. However, I don't like hearing it. When Luo Fan heard this, he raised his eyebrows, smiled, and said, "This voice also passed through countless barriers and directly poured into that world of nothingness. In an instant, he saw everything in that world, and at the same time, he saw the person who was speaking. It was an old man. No matter what one imagined the oldest old man to look like, he was definitely an old man that was 100 times older than one could imagine. The old man's face was filled with rage, as if he wanted to devour someone. When Luo Fan's voice reached him, the old man's body also surged with sound waves, as if forming a world that completely displayed the meaning of this sentence. When the old man heard this voice, he was slightly stunned. Then, all of his rage completely disappeared. I was wrong. I apologized to Taoist. With Taoist mystique, you really shouldn't be called a junior. After the old man's rage disappeared, he directly transmitted those words through the void to where Luo Fan was, allowing Luo Fan to clearly hear it. Hearing those words, Luo Fan furrowed his brows. He did not expect the old man to instantly change his attitude after being so furious earlier and actually apologize. He originally thought that the old man would have to fight with him before he could take back his words. He was even prepared to fight with him. Thank you for your understanding, Taoist. However, since the old man had said that, Luo Fan could not use his words to start a fight. As such, he could only say that. At this time, the countless stars and planets that he had destroyed had stabilized under his control, revealing countless kinds of refining materials. Every single one of these materials could only be obtained by destroying a star or a planet. One could imagine how precious and profound they were. As soon as each material appeared in space, it would naturally cause the space to change. Some would distort, some would shatter, some would fold, and some would stretch. There were all sorts of strange things. There was even a small portion of the materials that affected time, causing the time where the materials were located to undergo all sorts of strange changes. As Luo Fan waited for the old man's reply, he raised his hand and waved. As he moved through space, he moved the countless materials that were spread across 1 billion light years to where he was. If he ignored the materials and allowed them to pile up, the space there would probably be directly destroyed due to the appearance of the materials, resulting in unimaginable consequences. However, with Luo Fan here, these materials were naturally separated from the outside world with his perception and magic power. They would no longer affect the space-time of the outside world and were suspended in the void like ordinary materials. They were piled up into a ball that was even bigger than a star, quietly floating in the void. These materials may be enough for refining. Luo Fan looked at the countless materials, and such a thought flashed in his mind. Chapter 995. The old man's voice paused for a while before he leisurely said, "Since you have such a magical ability, you must know your limits. I made a mistake just now. If you have time, you can come to my place for a while. I will welcome you with open arms." "You're too serious. I didn't inform many fellow Taoists. I have some miscellaneous matters to attend to today. If I have time in the future, I will definitely visit you." Normally, Luo Fan would have fought with the strongest expert he had seen in the Earth universe. However, at this moment, he didn't have such thoughts at all, so he directly opened his mouth and said, "That's right." After he finished speaking, the old man's voice came again. "I look forward to the day we meet again." Luo Fan smiled and nodded. Then, the aura that collided with his aura slightly retracted. In the blink of an eye, it returned to the world it was originally in, as if it had never appeared. Seeing that the aura retracted, Luo Fan smiled and pointed. The huge star-like materials floating in front of him suddenly trembled and collapsed. All the material powder was taken out by Luo Fan according to the ratio and mixed together in front of him, forming a huge sphere. This sphere looked like a star, gray and hazy. There seemed to be countless lights and shadows flashing inside, as if there was a complete world existing in this huge sphere. Its mysteriousness could be clearly seen just by looking at its current appearance. Although Luo Fan had remarkable abilities and was almost omnipotent, there was no way he could be as omnipotent as a saint. After all, there was no way he could be as omnipotent as a saint. The countless materials he obtained from destroying countless stars and planets within 1 billion light years were, of course, impossible to precisely match the ratio he wanted. Therefore, at this moment, after he formed the huge star-like sphere in front of him according to the ratio, there was still a planet-like sphere of materials. These materials were mixed together. They weren't as mysterious as the star-like sphere, but they were still unusual. As it rotated, there were faint, strange sounds coming from it, as if countless people were summoning something. Such a sound. It was extremely profound. If one was able to endure the temptation of its summoning, then one would be able to comprehend the profound mysteries of many stars and planets. One would be able to obtain boundless benefits from it and obtain unmatched good fortune. Of course, if one couldn't resist the temptation, couldn't resist its summoning, and charged into it, then that was what awaited that creature. Naturally, the terrifying attack of the essence extracted from countless stars and planets would be completely integrated into it. It became a part of this huge sphere. Luo Fan floated in the void, looking at the two spheres in front of him. This large, star-like sphere was naturally what he wanted to use. However, the other planet-like sphere, although it was an unexpected gain, was not simple. It would be a pity if it was wasted just like that. As this thought flashed through his mind, he had already designed a refining method for a magic treasure based on the material composition of the planet-like sphere. This was the method to refine a magic treasure. The basis of its usage was naturally his worldview. It's good to practice. Luo Fan had already made a decision after a slight change in his mind. As this thought flashed through his mind, he raised his hand and slapped it down toward the planet-like sphere. In an instant, countless threads shot out from his hands. These threads were unimaginably thin. Even a strand of hair was billions of times larger than these threads. However, the thread was so obvious that even a blind man would not be able to see it. They could even clearly see the existence of this thread. It was such a tiny thread that no living being could imagine that such a tiny thread existed in the world before they saw it. And this was only what outsiders saw. From an outsider's point of view, this thread was already extremely small. But in Luo Fan's mind, he could clearly sense that those threads were chains made of countless laws. Every single one of these chains was constructed from trillions of Tao laws. Every single thread contained unimaginable power. If it was an ordinary planet, the threads would be able to completely meld it with just a slight insertion. At this moment, the countless threads seemed to not need to pass through time or space. They left Luo Fan's palm and instantly appeared in the planet-like sphere. They inserted themselves into the sphere in an extremely mysterious way. As the thread-like chains pierced into the sphere, it suddenly shook. The entire sphere suddenly sped up and sped up. In the end, after a few breaths' time, its speed was already more than 1 billion times faster than before. The sound that had been continuously dissipating from a sphere was completely restrained at this moment. The light and shadow on it had completely disappeared, and the entire sphere had turned into a gray blur. This was what it meant when things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. The sound had not completely disappeared at this moment. Instead, it had reached a limit and reached a point where the void outside could not withstand it. Hence, once it wanted to leave the sphere and appear in the outside world, it would naturally be suppressed by a mysterious force and be swept back into the sphere. This was to prevent it from causing irresistible damage to the outside universe. There is no need to say much about the various strange scenes that originally appeared because the speed at which it was evolving had already surpassed the limits of what the naked eye could bear. Hence, at a glance, it was gray and seemed to be in a state of chaos. Luo Fan's countless chain-like threads continuously changed within the sphere according to Luo Fan's thoughts. They continuously guided the countless materials within the sphere and constructed three-dimensional talismans. The composition of these three-dimensional talismans was extremely mysterious. At first, the materials were first condensed into threads, and then the threads were condensed into countless tiny three-dimensional talismans. Afterwards, then, using these three-dimensional talismans as the foundation, he constructed countless three-dimensional talismans made of those silk threads as the foundation. If the three-dimensional talismans formed by the threads were regarded as a layer of three-dimensional talismans, then the talismans formed by the first layer of three-dimensional talismans would be the second layer of three-dimensional talismans. The magic treasures that Luo Fan refined, even if it was just for practice, would not be that simple. Therefore, even at this step, Luo Fan's refining process was still not completed. The second layer of three-dimensional talismans continued to be used as a unit to construct the third layer of three-dimensional talismans. After the third layer of three-dimensional talismans was constructed, the fourth layer continued to be constructed. The fourth layer built the fifth layer, and so on and so forth. Layer upon layer, ring upon ring. Finally, the entire sphere directly became a huge three-dimensional talisman. A three-dimensional talisman with 365 layers. The shape of this huge three-dimensional talisman was the shape of every three-dimensional talisman. In other words, it was spherical. The largest of the 365 layers of three-dimensional seal was made up of 1,296 three-dimensional seal with 364 layers. And each of the 364 three-dimensional talismans was composed of 1,296 three-dimensional talismans with 363 layers, and so on and so forth until the layer of three-dimensional talismans was formed by the threads, and so on and so forth, the refining process. The countless materials that made up the entire sphere were completely integrated into it without any waste, as if they had never appeared before. And at the moment when the 365 three-dimensional talismans were constructed, Luo Fan withdrew the countless threads that were inserted into the sphere. The sphere suddenly shook and suddenly began to gradually compress. Its compression speed was quite fast. In the blink of an eye, it had been compressed to half of its original size. And its shape also produced a mysterious change with this change. All the abnormalities disappeared completely, and the whole thing looked like a planet with no atmosphere at all. It quietly floated in front of Luo Fan. This object can be used to transform vitality, and it also contains the mysteries of the laws of countless stars and planets. It can be called the moon of the law realm. Luo Fan looked at the planet and suddenly had an idea. He laughed and said, as he said that, he casually pointed. The planet suddenly shook, and its shape began to change rapidly. Countless bumps and bumps appeared on its surface, and many craters appeared out of nowhere. Finally, it changed until it looked exactly like the moon of the law realm. When Luo Fan first created the law realm, he only treated it as a place for him to cultivate in seclusion. It was equivalent to a cave abode. Therefore, he did not create a sun, moon, or stars for the law realm. He only directly projected the starry sky of the outside world into it, and projected the sun in his memory into it. After that, due to various coincidental changes, the nature of the law realm improved beyond imagination, and it finally reached a level that almost surpassed the Great Thousand Worlds. The sun, moon, and stars that Luo Fan casually projected into it naturally underwent all sorts of mysterious changes during this process. Although it did not completely become real, it was no longer a simple projection. Instead, it became a mysterious existence that existed between projection and reality, like a dream world. Therefore, it was used as a reference for Luo Fan to modify this magic treasure. After Luo Fan completed the modification process, he did not immediately send the moon into the law realm. Instead, he opened his big sleeve and enveloped the moon into his universe in the sleeve. Luo Fan modified all the abilities that he had learned and passed according to the law world view, and the universe in the sleeve was no exception. After being modified by him, its power and usage were even more astonishing. Enveloping an object the size of a planet was as simple as eating or drinking. After putting the planet away, Luo Fan turned to face the countless materials that were the size of stars. Previously, when Luo Fan was refining the planet-sized material, he did not spend much time, only half a day. But now, the star-sized material still hadn't stabilized. It was still stirring inside the sphere, constantly evolving all sorts of strange and mysterious scenes. The materials in front of him were not for him to practice with. Faced with such a material, Luo Fan naturally had to deal with it carefully. In his mind, he continuously deduced the refinement method that he had previously thought of from beginning to end and from end to end over and over again. In the end, After he had modified some of the details even more perfectly, he raised his hand and waved. Suddenly, an incomparably huge river appeared above his head. This long river was extremely mysterious. It was so mysterious that no one could see its length clearly. If a magnanimous person were to see this long river, one might even feel that this river was as long as trillions of light years, as if it could circle the entire Earth 7 or 8 times. If a stingy person saw this long river, they would only think that this long river might not even be as long as Luo Fan. It was easy to imagine how profound it was. The entire long river was meandering and changing above Luo Fan's head. Its form was extremely mysterious. If Luo Fan's figure was only the secret of the transcendent realm, then this long river was completely revealing the Great Tao. Every change seemed to be the mystery of the supreme Great Tao that all cultivators diligently sought. Even the fluctuation of any single wave seemed like the Grand Tao was splashing its most spiritual principles towards the heavens and the earth, and it illuminated all living beings in the world. This long river was the Great Tao River. The Tao integration realm was a realm that was in harmony with the Tao. At the end of the cultivation path, one could condense the mysteries of the Great Tao that one had comprehended into a phantom of the Great Tao River. At the transcendent realm, one had already transcended the limits of the Tao. The final achievement of this realm was to be able to completely materialize the phantom of the Great Tao River condensed by the Tao integration realm. It would become a real, physical, Great Tao River and no longer be illusory and fragile like the Tao integration realm. At this moment, Luo Fan was already at the Great Perfection realm. Although he was still a long way from the end of the transcendent realm, he was still at the Great Perfection realm. Naturally, he could fully materialize his Great Tao River. This Great Tao River was materialized after Luo Fan sorted out his worldview. It contained almost all the mysteries of the laws that Luo Fan had comprehended. In fact, such a Great Tao River could already be called the Great Tao of the Law Realm. At this moment, this Great Tao River materialized above Luo Fan's head. With a sudden tremble, it instantly wrapped around the sphere formed by the countless materials that Luo Fan had collected after destroying countless stars and planets. Of course, the method of wrapping wasn't just a circle around the center of the sphere. Instead, it twisted and coiled around the surface of the sphere in a way that couldn't be described with words. This kind of coiling method was very profound, and it was only one round. It was just one round, but it had already covered the entire surface of the sphere. Looking from the outside, one couldn't even see the body of the sphere clearly. One could only see a mysterious Great Tao River that couldn't be accurately described by any color. After the Great Tao River wrapped around the sphere, countless mysteries of the laws were born. Countless profound mysteries were born from it, and they began to seep into the sphere in an extremely special order. As these mysteries seeped into the sphere began to gradually undergo an inexplicable change. Without the need for Luo Fan to control it, the countless materials within naturally condensed into threads. Then, they naturally condensed into empty spherical three-dimensional talismans. After these empty three-dimensional talismans were formed, they began to combine continuously. Every 12,960 three-dimensional talismans combined into a two-layered three-dimensional talisman. This star was incomparably huge. It was more than 10 million times bigger than the moon that Luo Fan had refined previously. The number of three-dimensional talismans condensed from all the materials was so much that it was impossible to describe the exact number of them. These endless three-dimensional talismans were actually a layer of three-dimensional talismans. This layer of three-dimensional talismans continued to evolve as the Great Tao River that Luo Fan had materialized continuously injected the mysteries of the laws into it. It began to naturally condense into a two-layered three-dimensional talisman. This two-layered three-dimensional talisman looked like a one-layered three-dimensional talisman. It was also in the shape of an empty sphere. After the two-layered three-dimensional talisman was formed, it naturally began to condense. Every 12,962 layered three-dimensional talismans finally condensed into a three-layered three-dimensional talisman. In this manner, the third layer, the fourth layer, the fifth layer. In the end, the entire star became a huge three-dimensional talisman. Its level had already reached 12,960 layers. This level was actually more than 40 times more than the 365 layers of the moon that Luo Fan had refined using the leftover materials. Because the number of three-dimensional talismans constructed in each layer was also 10 times more than the previous layer, although it was only 40 times more than the moon that had been refined using leftover materials. The number of the most basic three-dimensional talismans it contained was more than 1,000,000,000,000 times more. The two could even be said to be worlds apart. It could even be compared to an ant and Earth. When the last 12,960 three-dimensional talisman was formed, the void shook. Luo Fan's great Tao River seemed to be unable to wrap around the three-dimensional talisman. It was shaken out of the spherical, empty three-dimensional talisman and returned to the top of his head. On the other hand, the essence of the sphere had become restrained, and the entire sphere was pitch black to the extreme. It floated in the void like a black hole that even light could not escape from. It was completely integrated with its surroundings. Even though Luo Fan was so close to it, it was difficult for him to see its existence. This thing has finally been refined successfully. Next, let's see if my plan is feasible. Luo Fan looked at the deep, pitch-black 12,960 three-dimensional talisman layers in front of him. This was the thought that flashed through his mind. The three-dimensional talisman was an empty shell, and there should have been an extremely large space within it. However, at this moment, the entire sphere gave off the feeling that it was completely solid. Chapter 996. Luo Fan hovered in the void and looked at the pitch-black sphere in front of him with an extremely calm expression. With a slight thought from him, the sphere suddenly trembled and charged forward, rushing into the void that the law realm was attached to and enveloping the entire void. Because the sphere had completely separated the inside and outside space-time, as the void was enveloped by it, the attachment point of the law realm naturally changed. It changed from the original Earth's universe to the void inside the sphere. Following this change, the entire law realm underwent a subtle change. An indescribably subtle vibration spread throughout the entire law realm, causing every living being in the law realm to feel an indescribable tremble that originated from their own source. It was as if their very nature had suddenly changed. Such a change was naturally insignificant to ordinary living beings. They would naturally forget about it after a brief moment of distraction. However, it was completely different for those beings who were already at the 6th or 7th stage of the immortal realm. These beings at the 6th or 7th stage of the immortal realm were originally the most intelligent beings in the law realm. Their senses were naturally extremely sharp. To other living beings, such a vibration was just an ordinary vibration. However, they could sense countless information from this vibration. They could sense the subtle changes in the laws of the entire law realm, as well as the subtle changes in the void of the law realm. From there, they came to a sensational conclusion. That was, the law realm was moving. This conclusion was naturally unimaginable to them. It was natural for them to feel an unimaginable shock. The law realm was so vast that it could barely be calculated in light years. Such a huge world was actually moving under the influence of some kind of power. This fact simply subverted their understanding and made them suddenly feel like frogs at the bottom of a well. It was as if everything they had ever seen and heard was only as big as the mouth of a well. Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about the living beings in the law realm. After he moved the attachment point of the law realm into the spherical 12,960 three-dimensional talisman seal, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The space-time that the law realm was attached to shattered with a loud bang. As it shattered, the 12,960 layers of the three-dimensional talisman began to be pulled by an indescribable force, breaking through the layers of rules and barriers of the Earth's universe. It gradually entered the depths of the invisible void and gradually disappeared into the Earth's universe. Luo Fan had expected this since a long time ago. His eyes flickered as he took a step forward and directly stood on the 12,960 3D talisman layers. Along with the three-dimensional talisman, it was pulled into the depths of the void. After the countless laws and principles, there was only nothingness. This was the limit that Luo Fan could see when he was in the emptiness realm. It was a void that could only be seen after one had thoroughly understood all the rules and laws. However, at this point, although the pulling force weakened slightly, it did not disappear. Instead, it continued to pull the 12,960 layers of three-dimensional talismans deeper. In an area of nothingness, there was a great Tao that came from an unknown place and went to an unknown place. There were countless mysterious space-time paths on it. This was the place that Luo Fan could easily see when he was at the Tao integration stage. When Luo Fan appeared with the three-dimensional talisman in an instant, the entire Earth's universe shook slightly. However, it was only a slight tremble. Compared to the great Tao that was attached to the infinite space-time, it would be an exaggeration to say that Luo Fan's three-dimensional talisman, which was like a star, was an ant. It was already extremely rare for him to appear here and cause a slight tremble. How could there be any more reactions? That pulling force did not come from this place. It came from the unseen world of legends. Instead, it came from another location. It came from the depths of the unseen world. Following the traction force, Luo Fan followed the three-dimensional talisman in an incomparably mysterious posture, circling a mysterious trajectory. He seemed to have circled tens of millions of times on this path before he broke into a deeper place. This place was a boundless, dusky place. Here time, space, matter, energy, everything seemed to exist and not exist. They existed in a way that couldn't be described with words. If Luo Fan wasn't a transcendent who could see through all of this, any ordinary living being who came here would be completely lost, unable to transcend for all eternity. The indescribable pulling force came from this place. In other words, it was precisely this place that produced a traction force that allowed Luo Fan and the 12,960 layers of three-dimensional talismans to directly penetrate the barrier of the laws of the world, penetrate the invisible barrier of nothingness, penetrate the barrier of the unseen world, and step into this mysterious place. This was not some other place. This was the boundary between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Although Luo Fan could not see the end of this place as far as he could see, it seemed to be boundlessly vast. However, in fact, this place was actually just a thin layer of membrane, a kind of intersecting mixture produced by the contact between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. The reason why such a mixture would appear to be boundlessly vast was because of this. The reason was very simple. Although the time, space, matter, and energy here still had traces of the universe on Earth, there were traces of the aura of chaos. This aura of chaos caused time, space, matter, and energy to become extremely chaotic. Obviously, the concept of spaciousness and vastness was the concept of space. Since space had become chaotic, it was naturally impossible to use common sense to accurately describe the scene here. That was why it seemed so vast and boundless. After the 12,960 three-dimensional talisman layers entered this place, the moment it came into contact with the dusky and strange existence, it suddenly radiated an endless brilliance. The brilliance was so dazzling and hot that even Luo Fan felt like he was being roasted while standing on it. It was this brilliance that spurted the dusky existence over. In order to drown the 12,960 layers of the three-dimensional talisman, the grayish existences had to melt completely. Although the grayish existences kept surging over, they couldn't completely drown the three-dimensional talisman. It was as if the brilliance was formed by the countless dusky substances around the three-dimensional talisman layers. As he stood on the three-dimensional talisman, Luo Fan felt like he was standing on the sun. Furthermore, It was not an ordinary sun. It was the kind that shone on the perfect world since ancient times. It was a supreme, and powerful sun. Just as I expected, Luo Fan sighed to himself. With a slight thought, the law realm that had lost its attachment point began to gradually shift its attachment point to the 12,960 three-dimensional talisman layers. During this process, the three-dimensional talisman kept vibrating as if the attachment point of the law realm was a huge burden to it. Fortunately, although it kept vibrating in the end, when the attachment point was completely transferred to the three-dimensional talisman, it finally treated the three-dimensional talisman as its attachment point. In the end, the three-dimensional talisman still managed to hold on. It did not collapse and disappear due to the huge burden. During the process of the attachment point shifting, the changes in the law realm were even more intense than before. The vibrations that every living being could feel became longer and more intense. In the end, even ordinary living beings could feel that the entire law realm was undergoing changes that were of utmost importance to them. The powerful beings at the 6th or 7th level of the immortal realm were also in this process. They felt like they were undergoing a tribulation. They felt like their souls could scatter at any time, but once they passed it, they would be able to see the world again. When all the changes subsided, they felt an indescribable sense of relief. It was as if the pressure that had been weighing on them had disappeared in an instant. This feeling was so wonderful that it made all of them feel an inexplicable joy. They could not help but be immersed in it. Luo Fan was standing on the surface of the three-dimensional talisman. With a thought, the boundless light around him suddenly retracted. It was originally radiating outwards, but now it was directed inwards. From the outside, it became pitch black once again. That strange gray existence was still constantly colliding with the three-dimensional talisman, but it was unable to affect Luo Fan, who was standing on it, in the slightest. Luo Fan stood there with a faint look of joy on his face. Looks like it's done. This light can condense into the sun of the law realm. It's time to use the moon. Such a thought flashed through his mind. His perception directly cut into the law realm. The law realm was formed because of him. He had even opened up the great thousand world that was the predecessor of the law realm. Therefore, to him, the law realm was like his palm. He could do whatever he wanted without any restrictions. With a sweep of his perception, everything in the law realm was included in his mind. He did not miss anything. With another thought, the originally illusory sun of the law realm suddenly trembled. It suddenly turned from illusory to real. The light within it also underwent an extremely subtle change. It seemed to become vaster, more majestic, and hotter. This was the result of Luo Fan drawing the boundless light produced by the collision of the dusky existence in the outside world into the law realm. The light condensed into a sphere and completely overlapped with the illusory sun. After doing this, Luo Fan did not stop. He raised his hand and pointed. The moon in his Universe Creator sleeve directly left the Universe Creator sleeve and sank down. Like a sesame seed sinking into Earth, it sank into the 12,960 three-dimensional talisman layers. At this moment, the space-time inside the three-dimensional talisman had already been completely shattered. The point of the law realm was attached to the entire three-dimensional talisman. Therefore, the empty space inside the three-dimensional talisman was equivalent to the law realm. Therefore, when the moon entered the three-dimensional talisman, it was equivalent to entering the law realm. It was currently daytime in the law realm. When the moon entered the law realm, it directly overlapped with the moon that was originally in the void. The two merged and were located at the easternmost end of the law realm. When night came, it would rise into the sky and illuminate the law realm. The moon did not have the ability to emit light. However, it had the magical ability to transform vitality and power. Luo Fan casually made a grabbing motion, and the moon naturally formed an extremely subtle connection with the sun hanging high in the void. This connection allowed the moon to draw the sun's light into it at any time. Then, through the magical conversion of the moon, it would transform into the lunar essence. It was like a real moon, and it had the magical ability to illuminate the world. When the sun of the law realm changed, the living beings in the law realm could faintly sense that the law realm was undergoing a change. However, no one knew where the change came from. Only many peerless geniuses were looking at the sun by chance and could directly sense the change. As a result, they were attracted by the mysteries of the law realm contained within the sun and fell into an indescribable state of enlightenment. This sun was stimulated by the 12,960 three-dimensional talisman layers colliding with the dusky existence outside. It naturally contained the mysteries contained within the three-dimensional talisman. The three-dimensional talisman was condensed automatically because Luo Fan had continuously integrated the mysteries of the laws he had comprehended into it. It could be said that it was a direct manifestation of the mysteries of the laws that Luo Fan had comprehended. Through this three-dimensional talisman, one would naturally be able to comprehend many mysteries of the laws. Those peerless geniuses were only able to enter an epiphany through the changes in the light because of their aptitude and comprehension. However, it was only for a moment. When all the changes stabilized, the sun and the law realm would completely fuse, and the mysteries contained within the sunlight would be no different from the rest of the law realm. If one wanted to enter an epiphany by looking at the sun again, it would be no different from looking at other things. However, the difficulty would increase to the point that it would be no different from looking at other things. Luo Fan did not care about the changes in the law realm at all. When he was done, he discovered an extremely shocking fact. That was, where the law realm was located, the tide of the times could not reach. In other words, the gap between the heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos was actually a paradise that was not affected by the changes of the times. So that's how it is. What an unexpected gain. Luo Fan could not help but be overjoyed. After giving it some thought, he understood what was going on. This was the boundary between the Earth's universe and the state of primal chaos. In other words, this place was actually somewhere between the perfect heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos. Although this place still belonged to the Earth's universe, it had already been assimilated to a certain extent by the state of primal chaos. Although the tide of the times was so powerful that even sages had to disappear under its influence, it was still, after all, it was only a certain mechanism of the Earth's universe, a certain mystery. Although it had unlimited power and endless uses, in the face of the state of primal chaos that could create countless Earth's universes, how could it be considered anything? The boundary between the Earth's universe and the state of primal chaos had already been partially assimilated by the state of primal chaos. So how could the tide of the times invade it? As such, this place was naturally a paradise that the tide of the times could not reach. However, since this place can hide from the tide of the times and allow cultivators to avoid the influence of the reincarnation of the times, why aren't there any cultivators hiding here? Luo Fan suddenly had such a doubt. This doubt had initially made him very confused. He even suspected that there was something here that he had overlooked. Suddenly, he saw the huge, three-dimensional seal under his feet. He could not help but come to a sudden realization and laughed out loud. It turned out that he had been thinking too much. There were actually two reasons why he was able to come here. The first reason was that his cultivation method was, in fact, created according to the cultivation system of the Great Tianyuan world. The various cultivation realms were in fact created according to the extremely mature cultivation system of the Great Tianyuan world, which had even created 800 sages. It was an extremely perfect cultivation path. Therefore, when he was in the transcendent realm, he could completely develop the power that was most suitable for becoming a sage in this realm, allowing him to have the ability to transcend. Only then could he have the opportunity to see the state of primal chaos so clearly in this realm and discover the gap between the state of primal chaos and the Earth's universe. The second reason was that he had already sorted out a complete worldview that completely belonged to him. Although the emergence of this worldview did not give him the ability to crush all cultivators of the same level, it allowed him to change his relationship with the Earth's universe from the original dependent relationship to one that was barely on par. This change in relationship allowed him to be less restricted by the Earth's universe, allowing him to break through the mysterious Tao and enter the gap between the state of primal chaos and the Earth's universe. These two conditions complemented each other, but without either of them, Luo Fan would not have been able to appear here. Without the first condition, Luo Fan would not have been able to see the existence of the gap at all. At most, he would have been able to see the mysterious Tao. If not for the second condition, he would have been able to see the gap between the state of primal chaos and the Earth's universe. He would have been restricted by the mysterious Tao and would not have been able to step into this place with his real body. After thinking about this, how could Luo Fan not feel that his worries just now were laughable? In this way, I should have no worries and can continue to cultivate in this Earth's universe without worrying about the changes in the reincarnation cycle of the Earth's universe. As Luo Fan thought about this, he could not stop smiling. The Earth's universe was currently in the age of degeneration. Although the end of that era was still more than 5 billion years away from now, which seemed extremely long to a cultivator of Luo Fan's level, it was only a few secluded cultivation sessions. Who knew when he would arrive?